Today is all about the microbial kingdom. We have a special guest that's going to go up after my presentation, after lunch, who's Drake Weinert, who is he's basically one of the key people that brought Korean natural farming to the Big Island. So we all owe some gratitude and debt to Drake, who's here today, for bringing Master Cho out originally and blessing us with this information. And basically, I took his course that empowered me to also become a teacher of K.N.F., and I've been teaching K.N.F. ever since. And I just thought having the K.N.F. classes, a lot of the times it went over people's head of why. Why are we grooming these microbes? Why are we shepherding microbes? Why are we treating microbes like they're living animals or organisms, like husbandry, like we do for cattle or sheep or pigs? So really what K.N.F. is microbial husbandry. You could think of it like that, or microbial shepherding. So with those questions that came up a lot of why, I wanted to have this class, which is all about the microbial kingdom, or the hidden half of nature, the nature beneath our feet, all around us, inside our body, on the surface of our skin, in every ocean, every mountain, every valley, every tree, every human, all share in this microbial kingdom. So it's very important we understand it, right? You guys ready to get started? So I'm going to read to you from this book right here. This is a book, if you haven't heard this or read this, you should. It's called The Hidden Half of Nature, The Microbial Roots of Life and Health. Key here within this time, life and health. This book is crucial. It's written by a husband and wife. One is a biological scientist, and the other one's a environmental scientist. So them combined made a really good book. And I'm going to read some of that from that book, as well as some of my own notes, kind of to give you an introduction to this class. There might be some more space over here if you guys want to grab a chair and bring it over. There's more chairs outside too from the deli that we can get. Okay, so the hidden half of nature. We are living through a scientific revolution, as illuminating as any in modern history. Yet this discovery does not focus on massive planetary bodies or discovering new elements, but on life too small to see with the naked eye. An explosion of discoveries are rapidly exploding about life under our feet, within us, and literally everywhere on Earth. How are you? Yo. That way, bro. All right. Literally everywhere on Earth, what modern science is discovering is the world we know is but a world we mostly overlook. Science is now discovering just how important this microbial world is in our lives, from soil fertility to our own health and our own immune response. The idea of an invisible world of ecosystems is fascinating. Does that fascinate you? An invisible world of ecosystems. Just like all these ones we get to witness, there's other ones that we don't see ever, but they're still working, regardless of what we think about them. They're still going to be there doing their job. Microbial world is the it's important microbes of our life. From soil fertility to our own health and immune response, the idea of the invisible world are fascinating. Conventional medicine has always viewed microbes as pathogens. Remember this. This is critical for the teachings today. Conventional medicine has always viewed microbes as pathogens. And they also do this. They assign specific diseases to specific microbes. That's the modern accepted conventional science, which is based on theory, not law, or not fact. Okay, so we have this idea in our world, and even amongst K.N.F. and even amongst soil food web people and whatnot, about good and bad microbes. You guys have heard that before? Oh, I got bad microbes in my belly. I need the good ones to purge out the bad ones. Oh, there's bad microbes over here in the soil. We need good ones to balance the fertility. Well, the reality is there's no bad microbes. There's only microbes that are doing their job, that were ordained for them by their creator. So if it might be a bad circumstance that was created by somebody, that those microbes then show up and can be interpreted as being bad or harmful. But if you take a step back, they're just doing their job to create balance. Microbes are always trying to create balance on this planet. A landowner buys a new piece of land with an old growth forest and he bulldozes it to the ground. The microbes kick into action instantly. Within the second that tree falls, microbes are repairing the soil, calling in weeds, telling anything that needs to happen to balance that situation back out, they're going to call it in. And that's why you got cane grass after you bulldoze. That's why you got monster weeds that create massive root knots in the ground that are impossible to deal with after. Because it's kind of like a punishment for what you did. And it's just trying to correct the imbalance that you created. Because if you observed a cane grass, freshly bulldozed, freshly cane grass piece of property. Observe that property untouched for 30 years. Tell me what happens. So after a certain amount of time, the microbial population there isn't going to support cane grass anymore. It's going to support a woodland or a tree because it's creating from a bacterial to a fungal environment that supports a woodland. So really, if you left that thing alone, you already damaged it, you made the mistake, but now you just leave it alone, nature will heal it. It'll take time. It's not going to happen overnight or within 10, 20, 30 years, but in time, it'll restore back to its original, or at least a better version of that there. So what I'm trying to say is there's no good or bad microbes. There's microbes that balance human mistakes. There's more room too if we want to squeeze in over here at all. If anybody wants to come squeeze in over here, there's more room. And we could also there's also room too to bring a few chairs in front over here. If anybody wants to bring a couple of chairs up front.
You want to see them there just about like
Could even maybe see that table in and Dr. Michael will come back Alright, cool. You guys are awesome. Alright, so the latest revelation revealed we're not who we thought we were. Pasteur, bacteria, fungi, and protists, archaea, as numerable as do innumerable viruses exist in and on our bodies. From the last scientific studies, at least a 3-to-1 ratio of other cells to human cells exist on and in you. Up to 10-to-1 ratio. You guys understand what I just said? We could have 10 times more microbial cells on this thing right here, this body, than human cells that make up my teeth, my brain, my hair. 10 times, at least 3 times more, up to 10 times more. Is that pretty amazing? I mean, so it makes you question, what are we? What are we? We're like this walking microbial farm, you know? And it makes you also beg the question, are we here for the microbes or the microbes here for us? Is the human a microbial superaggregate? Is the tree a microbial superaggregate? Did the tree come because the microbes needed a certain food source or needed a certain cycle to keep their evolution going? Maybe. These are the questions we need to ask. So we're completely covered both inside and out with microbial armor. Microbial armor. These are here for your benefit. Remember, there's no good or bad microbes. There's only imbalances corrected. Both humans and plants completely rely on microbes for health. Soil fertility to counter the plagues of man-made diseases. Microbes are essential to all life. Think about K&F. Think about the levels of sanitation that are taught in our societies. Wiping out microbes from surfaces and from houses and from farms. And so what happens when you create that imbalance? Oh, I got a bad microbe that did this. Oh, this virus came on my plant. Well, who's to blame, the virus or yourself? Think about our relationship with how our actions impact this unseen world. Detergents, chemical pesticides, chemical fertilizers, how do these impact the microbial world? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves, especially when taking action on our farms, when taking action on what we decide to consume or put on our body. We can think about the possibilities of therapeutic and curative properties of microbes in human health. The science is on the cutting edge right now of basically fermentations that they see are creating new vitamins, vitamin B12s, creating multivitamins out of fermenting different products on yeasts, and they even have created cannabinoids that they grow out on yeast. So these are like this cutting edge science with health and microbes that we need to look into. Decades ago, this would have sounded insane to modern science. But now we look to the ancient future for solutions to our current problems. No longer will conventional medicine and conventional wisdom do. We need to look deeper, we need to look to the ancestors, but we're not going backward, we're going forward into the ancient future. Symbiotic relationships. Bacterial cells in our intestines. So this is some new information too. They can teach human cells to ID friend from foe, or to ID when there's an imbalance. So what I'm trying to say is that the microbes that we ingest as a child, or the sicknesses that we have as a child, are teaching and encoding our DNA for how to deal with problems later on. So if your child never gets a flu, never gets a cold, that's a problem. That's a big problem, because that's not encoding his DNA and encoding his immune system to protect itself in the future. So it's not about sheltering or about hiding from microbes. It's about letting your children play in the dirt. It's about letting them put their fingers in their mouth. It's about letting them hug up and touch up on other children on the playground. It's about interaction with this microbial world, with the soil. The fertile soil is just beneficial to humans. They got these things now where they're selling fertile soil in capsules to re-inoculate the gut biome. So they're selling soil or dirt in a capsule that you take for a probiotic. So just imagine just bypassing all that BS and just playing in the soil.
That's a problem with most people's kids these days. They're on their phone.
They're on their phone. But we can't, so that's a great issue. But whose fault is that? Right. Oh, Dad, I want the phone. Who cares? You know, I don't know. Like, my parents didn't let me play video games whenever I wanted. It was like that special moment. And then as soon as I became like an intelligent teenager, I didn't even want to play anymore. You know? Yeah. So, the front line of defense, right? The microbial life is the front line of defense. Before a medicine, before a vaccine, before any of that, the microbes are there as our front line of defense. The powers to be are at war with microbiology to our own detriment. That's a direct quote from the book. The powers to be are at war with microbiology to our own detriment. Microbes run this world, from extracting nutrients from rocks to equalizing global carbon, nutrient cycling in plants and humans. It's time we recognize our microbial superhero friends. They shaped our past, and how we treat them will shape our future. So that's my introduction, and now we're going to get into some real deal. You guys ready? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is the microbial kingdom. 3 key microbes we're going to talk about today. Bacteria, fungus, and viruses. These are the 3 main ones found on the planet Earth. And these are the three main ones we're going to focus on today. There's many, many others we'll talk about also when we get into soil feedback. But we're going to start here with bacteria. Bacteria, straight from Wikipedia, they got a definition. Bacteria, or singular bacterium, are a type of biological cell. They constitute a large domain of prokaryotic microorganisms, typically a few micrometers in length. So pay attention to these things. We're talking about micrometers in length. Bacteria have a number of shapes ranging from spheres to rods to spirals. Bacteria were among the first life forms to appear on Earth and are present in most of its habitats. Bacteria inhabit soil, water, acidic hot springs, radioactive waste, and the deep biospheres of the Earth's crust. They've been found on meteorites. These microbes live everywhere. Bacteria also lives in symbiotic with parasitic relationships with plants and animals. Most bacteria have not been characterized, and only about 27% of the bacteria phyla have species that can be grown in a laboratory. 27%. Study of bacteria is known as bacteriology, a branch of microbiology. So bacteria is basically a type of biological cell. They're responsible to help with photosynthesis, vitamin B12 production, 40 million cells per gram of soil. So per gram of soil, there's 40 million cells of microbes per gram of soil. They're responsible for fixation of nitrogen, for nutrient cycling, help with decomposition. They're responsible for putrefaction and rot. So without these things, like, the cycles don't happen. They're found heavily in your gut and on your skin. They're responsible for such diseases as tuberculosis and other bacterial diseases. Keep in mind the science, how I started out, they want to assign one microbe for one disease. So, when we talk about the modern diagnosis, is also keep an open mind. Antibiotics weakened due to the antibiotic used in agriculture. So basically, the antibiotics used in agriculture down the stream affect our health because of how it reacts to that bacterial world. A lot of respiratory infections are due to a bacterial imbalance. Okay? Any questions on bacteria? We're going to do a couple slides here. This is under a micron telescope. These are more bacteria. Just showing you the different shapes and sizes and how they look under a microscope. And we're going to look at some more here in a minute. But we're going to move on to funguses. Before we do that, though, bacteria. If we understand farming, grasses, salads like lettuces, anything leafy, anything that's not fruiting, loves bacterial soils. Bacteria is easy. To create bacteria and add it to a soil, or to have a high bacterial soil, is easy. Think FPJ, think FAA. Think about these sugary type substances that we can add to our soil to heighten bacterial ratios. So bacteria is easy. Really, if you want some bacteria too, you just rough up the soil, and it'll invite in bacteria as well. So they will come to help balance that. Any questions on bacteria? We'll touch more on it too as we go. So funguses, fungi are the next class the next member of our world that I want to talk about, and they have a quick description here on. This Wikipedia is so funny. That's what it chooses to tell you and not tell you. But a fungus is a member of the group, the same eukaryotic group organisms that include microorganisms such as yeast and mold, as well as the more familiar mushrooms. These organisms are classified as a kingdom, which is separate from the other eukaryotic life kingdoms of plants and animals. So fungi are a little bit harder, where bacteria is easy to get into your farming system. Fungi is a little more tricky, and that's when you're talking IMOs and your compost teas. We're trying to get that fungi life up there. So fungi, that makes them different from bacteria is they contain chitin in their cell wall. All fungi have a chitin in their cell wall. You can write that word down and look it up later. That's what crabs have in their shells and whatnot. They feed through absorption by secretion and digestive enzymes. So they're responsible. They melt rocks into minerals for plants. They literally will melt a rock into a soluble mineral. They do not photosynthesize, which I found interesting. They replicate by growth through their webbing or their mycelia or spores. They are the key decomposers of nature. They're the ones you see a log in the forest, you're gonna have mushrooms on it. That's their whole job like that. You've seen some like this before. They're kind of these hard mushrooms and stuff you see in the forest. These are your decomposers in nature. Fungi are closely related to animals than they are plants through their biology. Visible as mushrooms or molds, but also microscopic. Used in the fermentation of foods as well as bacteria. The fermentation is what gives food distinct flavors. If you think about like miso, kimchi, cheese even, this fermentation process is releasing flavors and vitamins, like when I talked about earlier, the advances in science. They're learning that these certain fermentations will produce B vitamins and other vitamins that are good for human consumption. Some will also produce mycotoxins that could be harmful or beneficial to humans. Think psychotropic compounds that come from mushrooms as well. That's the Amanita mushroom, one of the most hallucinogenic. The Santa Claus mushroom. Said the reindeers and foxes up in the north will eat this and hallucinate. Those are edible oysters. So this is what we're going for in farming. This right here would be known as like an IMO or an indigenous microorganism. There's an IMO3 pile, and you can see it blooming. So when it comes to fungi in farming, Master Cho has showed us a way that we can actually capture it from an old growth forest, bring it into our farm, and then spray it and use it as soil foundation. That's another picture right there of a close-up of like a well-inoculated root system with mycorrhizae. So most of those white streams are actually fungal, not roots. And then this chart right here, this chart is the chart that shows when I was talking about high bacterial dominant soil, that's up here. Fungal dominant soils are down here. And you can see weeds, what do they love? High back, right? So you bulldoze that forest and you got weeds because you made it super bacterial. And then we get down here to brassicas, like your cauliflowers and stuff, grasses and vegetables. And you see how they start liking more fungal dominant soils as we get into the more fruiting type. These are row crops like corn and stuff like that. Cannabis would be right here in your row crop with the 50-50. Shrubs, vines, and bushes. Deciduous trees, evergreen trees. So your fruit trees and stuff are going to be right in here. So most people's soil is over here, especially if you bulldozed anytime in the last 20 years or 30 years. You got your soil looking more like this. We're going for the soil that looks more like this for a long-term farm situation. Any questions on that?
How can you get to that level if you like just got my lot?
Yeah. So to get to that level, we would implement a K&F system into your farm, and we will be hosting the K&F classes again here real soon. Probably in August, we'll have another K&F course. that actually teaches you how to create the 9 core nutrients and how to collect that IMO like I showed in this picture. How to do this process. So once you do this process on your farm, now you got your fungal dominant super soil, super inoculant that you can then make a bottle of compost tea with and spray on your farm on a weekly basis to start converting that soil from this side to that side. So with those inoculations, you're slowly working your way that way, as well as scattering that, it's called IMO 3 or 4, this picture, and you're scattering that on your farm as well as you're spraying it and inoculating your farm with it. So that's the pinnacle. The pinnacle of K&F is called LIMO, liquid IMO, liquid indigenous microorganism. And if you want to jump into K&F and you haven't, I suggest going to Drake's website, naturalfarminghawaii.net. You also have one more pamphlet of his on that. And he has workbooks for sale too. So those are recipe guides for K&F, and he teaches his branch is pure K&F. So this class, like again I said, is focused on the microbial kingdom, and then the application would be another class. But we can touch on that in review if you want the questions to come in for those as they arise. So thanks for asking that question. Anything to follow up?
How important is it to supply the food that the fungi depend upon for survival, such as mulching heavily, getting out trees, chipping mulching for the soil?
Super good. Super good. Mulching is key, cover cropping is key. Those 2 elements alone, just doing those 2 things, you'll see a night and day thing on your farm. Mulching, cover cropping. Just those 2 things alone. Like Uncle said, is you're bringing in the mulch. You get mulch layers, and especially in kind of like a lasagna technique, you're inviting in all kinds of diverse fungi and bacteria into your system, and then pretty soon you'll be picking up roots and seeing these little hairy guys coming off the roots, these little puffs of white, and then you know you got that mycelium growing and you get that fungal dominance going. So I guess we could jump into a little soil food web. That'd be a good place to go right now. Yeah, because I'm gonna come back to viruses because there's a lot to unwrap with viruses. But just real quick, I'm going to show you some more microbes just so we know what we're dealing with. See this right here, if you have Instagram, you should check this guy out. Microbial ecology. Okay, I'm just going to show you guys some of this. This is amazing. This is a tardigrade, a water bear, invisible to the naked eye. Has eggs in it. It's feeding on something there. Here's a tardigrade crawling out of his cuticle. Water bears lay eggs and deposit them in their shed covering. 3 are seen here. That's a microbe you can't see. Looks like a living, like a dog or a cat or something, Let's see what else we got. Here's a ciliate in the genus Blephariosoma. This natural pink single-cell creature has a large oral cilia, upper left. You see those hairs moving? I don't know if you can see it. So let's just keep going. Just look at these things. This is the world that we're talking about today. Here's a microscopic worm. You can see the nutrients pulsing through its body and its waste products. Portuguese man o' war also. These are ciliates called colebs. They can hunt and scavenge for food despite being only a single cell organism. You guys amazed yet? Or what? I'm pretty amazed. I mean, these things are doing this right now, all over, in our bodies, on our skin, out there, in the air.
In the ocean?
The ocean.
So when you have the marijuana up there, like, because when I swim, I see all kinds of predators.
Yeah, yeah.
You see more.
Right.
It's more of that than water.
True.
There's so much life.
Yeah, it's just in there suspended.
Yeah.
The NPR just did this study and they found over 200 millions of viruses in the ocean. 200 million different species, or not species, but classifications of viruses in the ocean. Right. That's another water bear, the tardigrade. Yeah, little claws and stuff. All those nutrients moving through its body. Watch how this one moves. That's how it mobilizes. Just kind of stretches itself along. Like that. There's a bunch of bacteria. Pretty cool, yeah. There's a water bear inside its natural habitat, feeding on cyanobacteria. So pretty amazing, yeah. So yeah, this guy's page, if you go to his page, he just has all this microscopic work going on. Look at the colors in here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Single cell cilia in the genus Fungonia. Fully multicolored algae and cyanobacteria that it has ingested. So now you can get a visual of what we just talked about, these nutrient cycling, these microbes ingesting, and
What is the name of the division?
it's microbial ecology.
That tells you what to look for at the different microscope, like if your microbes are actually working or not.
Yeah, if you want to get that far, you can scope out compost teas under the microscope. You can scope out your IMOs, and you can really. I know Drake teaches like a micro class or a microscope class sometimes, and you can kind of get the gist of what you're looking at and identifying. The easiest ones to identify are rods of fungi and these little bacteria that are just black dots and they bounce around. That's usually what we look at when we look under a microscope or IMO. But you're looking for like a certain amount of rods of fungi, a certain amount of bacteria per slide, and then also you can find a positive nematode too. These are like little signs that you look for. Soil under the scope, but that's a whole other class. So stay on track here. So we'll jump into some soil food web and just why it's important to basically nurture nature.
I think it's from your thing. I know. I thought it was me at first too, and I was like, not me.
Yeah. Right.
Bacteria turn it on. Okay. Alex. Oh, there it goes. Yeah. It'll pick me up. Okay, so we went over what are microbes. Soil food web. So this soil food web, which was coined by a woman named Elaine Ingham, you can look her up too. She's like the grandmother of compost. And soil food web, the health of the soil food web directly impacts the health of the plant. You can translate that directly to the human biome. The human gut biome directly translates, the health of this translates to the health of the human. Direct correlation, right? So here on the soil food web, we can see all the players in this symphony. You see how they're all working together, from large macro animals to micro animals, and how they all play a role. Now the key to health on a farm is to restoring this. If you restore this, your farm's healthy. Later on, we're going to get into it, but I'll quote it now. Only sick plants get viruses. Okay? So keep that in mind. Soil food web, a little simpler. Compost comes down, micro and macro arthropods eat it. Mycorrhizae, there's a whole nutrient cycling exchange. We could get into detail in another class, in the K&F class. So I'll just read this real quick. The soil food web is a community of organisms living all or part of their lives in the soil. It describes a complex living system in the soil and how it interacts with the environment, plants, and Soil food web describes the transfer of energy between species in an ecosystem, while a food chain examines one linear energy pathway through an ecosystem. So we're talking about a web, not just a linear how one thing eats. So any more questions on soil food web per se? People understand soil food web and the importance of it? Crucial. When we do have another K&F class, we'll dive heavily into soil food web. The whole class is more about taking that apart and examining it, and how we can remedy and correct
What's so
imbalances.
unique about why part of the soil food web, because California has a lot of older grass and limestone, 6-year-old grass that how the quality fitting that, so
Yeah.
they got
Right. Right. So how that soil food web looks will obviously be dependent on where you live. Like we're not going to have moles, But yeah. So yeah, the components of that soil food web will be based on the ecology around it. Is what Olo was pointing out. So yeah, it might not be the same players every single time, but they are doing the same thing: nutrient cycling, creating air, breathability for roots. Overall, the soil food web's job, no matter what region, is the same. The set of microbes and animals will be determined on where you are.
Like you're saying too, is like it could be different from Kohala to South Point.
100%. Yeah. And that's why in Korean natural farming, we're all about indigenous microorganisms, collecting organisms from your farm, not from Kohala, not from Hilo, not from the mainland, not made in a laboratory, but from your farm. Question?
How massively different do you think the microbiome ecosystem is now? Having been deforested and I think they spray a good amount of Roundup and stuff to control weeds.
Right.
What do you think is, if there's any way you can even categorize it, the difference between what was and what is now?
I mean, I personally, I feel like things like Rapidodia death. I went to New Zealand. They have their own version of Rapidodia death on their native trees. Why is this happening on Earth at the same time? Why didn't New Zealand get it 50 years ago and we got it now? It happened at the same time because we're terraforming this Earth by what we do to it. So if people are going to spray chemtrails and spray Roundup and go ahead and be selfish like that, well, you got to deal with the consequence. All your elders, the trees are the oldest things on this island. They're just dying. They're giving up. Why would a tree give up on life? What could we do so bad to the environment that a whole tree, like a whole species, a whole ecosystem gave up on life? That doesn't happen. God doesn't create death. Like he wants life to thrive, So in order to witness that, you got to take responsibility once again. And what Brendan said is through our actions we see the consequences. So yeah, the earth as it was untouched by man's stupidity. I mean, you can imagine how healthy people were. Remember what we talked about? We're going to get to viruses here in a second, but the whole thing with the microbial world is all about balance. We already went over the bulldozing and the crops coming up and the microbes trying to balance your mistake. So the microbes are only trying to balance. So if it looks like a microbe doing something evil, it's because whatever came before it is trying to correct and balance it. So yeah, good question. And that's why I think we're witnessing Rapidodia death and New Zealand having the same native trees dying.
Canada, DC.
So it's a global. These things are global. No longer is it just local. So whew, you guys ready for viruses? Bring it. Okay, let's do it. Yeah, I guess we could just we'll jump into viruses, and then after that we'll talk about the war on microbes. few quotes before we get into viruses. Healthy plants don't get viruses. The germ is nothing. The terrain is everything. Louis Pasteur, the founder of germ theory, on his deathbed. This is my own quote when I was writing this out. I realized microbes can only serve God. They only can do their function on the planet. They can't be malicious. They can't be evil. They can't be looking to murder you. They can't do that. They can only serve God. They can only do what their biological existence is here to do. They don't think about hurting you. Here's one of my favorites from Master Cho. You want maggots? Then create an environment for maggots. It's that simple. You want beautiful fungal soil? Well, create an environment for beautiful fungal soil. You want health in your body and in your home? Well, create an environment for health and body in your home. That's really all there is to it. You want maggots? Then create an environment for maggots in your living. Go put a piece of steak in a jar and leave it open. Come back out in a week and get maggots because we created that environment for maggots. So if you want a really high-grade WCP, water-soluble calcium, you make the proper environment for that water-soluble calcium to be of its highest grade. Whatever environment you create is what you invite. And that gets us back to germ theory versus terrain theory. This is deep. Germ theory versus terrain theory. Make sure I do this properly so we don't skip a beat. Okay, viruses. Germ theory versus terrain theory. Terrain theory says it's the environment that causes disease. That germ theory says it's the microbe that causes disease. Okay? So what I'm going to do is read for you real quick some excerpts out of this so we get on the same page. Before that, though, I guess we better understand what a virus is. So a virus, we'll go back to what is a virus. The most abundant, it might not really be classified as a microbe, but we'll call it that for the sake. Most abundant microbe on Earth. More than bacteria, more than fungi, we got viruses. The most abundant microbe on Earth. These are not considered alive. So when I teach K&F, I teach about how the function of humans, animals, plants, and microbes are the same. We all eat, we all eat, we all sleep, we all poop, we all reproduce, we all breathe. All animals, plants, microbes, humans do all those things. Viruses do none of those. They don't eat, sleep, poop. The reproduction is a different thing. So we're dealing with something different than our common microbe, right? Break down the word environment. Right in the middle is viro. Environment. What do we talk about the environment being? But basically a bunch of microbes, you know? They're the super agents of balance. Just like we were talking about bacteria being super agents and helping balance stuff. Well, the real super agent of balance on the planet Earth are viruses. That's their role. The key role of a virus on Earth is to correct imbalances. They're responsible for evolution, adaptation, and mutations of other organisms. Why? Because they have the ability to transfer DNA and RNA between organisms. No other thing on this planet Earth can do this. So if something ever adapted to a region, ever mutated for some reason, ever evolved, if that's real, then it was the help of a virus that helped make that possible. A virus can act as a solvent or a cleansing agent in the environment and in your body. So a flu could simply mean you didn't do your due diligence of cleansing your body on your own. So God came and gave you a solvent or a cleansing agent. Because I guarantee if you have a bad flu, you're not eating. You're probably either drinking very little or only water. You're probably pooping a lot, right? You're probably coughing up mucus. What are those things? What are those things that I just explained?
Cleansing.
Those are all modes of cleansing the body. Sweating a lot, right? When you sweat until you can't sweat no more. So you can take a sauna, or you can build up your toxins enough that God will send a virus to help you. There's millions of varieties all around us, in our bodies, in the ocean, in the soil, and in the air. So what are we scared of here? If you knew this is what a virus is, what are we scared of? The virus is just doing its God-given job. Now think about a pig pen we'll stay away from China. Indonesia. A pig pen in Indonesia. As far as the eye can see, there's just pigs on there. There's a septic system of waste that's a cesspool the size of a state. Right? It's a runoff from this pig pen system. Is that a natural environment? Does that resemble nature and ecosystem whatsoever? So what would need to happen if that was out of balance to get it back in balance? H1N1 maybe? Sure, why not? So really, I'm glad you guys understand it. This is what we're talking about. Germ theory versus terrain theory.
His head explode back
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's talk about germ theory versus terrain theory. You guys following so far? Okay, so up there before was a picture of Louis Pasteur. He is you ever heard of pasteurization? Well, if it wasn't for Louis Pasteur, we wouldn't have pasteurization. And before I read this, basically Louis Pasteur did some scientific experiments in the 1800s. He was a part of the French, scientific scholar. So he did some experimentations where he set out a jar to ferment. And of course it fermented, right? And it did its thing. And based upon that fermentation, we have all scientific theories about medicine based on the germ theory. That if that's something out here, that something from external is going to come deal with it. Okay, so fungi, bacteria are always going to function the same. So if you put out LAB catch water, so I'm talking about lactic acid bacteria is one of the recipes in Kona, the most abundant microbe on it. If you put out carbohydrate water, like rice wash water, or water with some potatoes dissolved into it, every single time lactic acid bacteria will inoculate that water. Every single time. If you took a bag, like say you had a paper bag or a plastic bag, and someone with influenza coughed into it and spit into it, sneezed into it, they could come in this room and put it over every one of our heads. Maybe a small percentage might get it. Maybe not. Maybe half of us get it. Depends on the train, right? But that jar of fermentation will always inoculate. Every time the lactic acid bacteria will always inoculate that water. But how come when we put the bag over our head with supposedly these germs in it, not all of us get sick from it? when we know that the lactic acid bacteria always inoculates that job, no matter what.
The train's different. And we're different.
So let's talk about terrain theory. Where most Americans probably have heard of Louis Pasteur. It is doubtful that many are familiar with this name and the work of Antoine Béchamp. The two 19th century researchers were scientific contemporaries, compatriots and fellow members of the French Academy of Science. But key differences in their views on biology and disease pathology led to the prolonged rivalry between both within and outside academia. This is super important, you guys. Béchamp was the more brilliant thinker, but Pasteur had political connections, including Emperor Napoleon III, reportedly not above plagiarizing and distorting Béchamp's research. Pasteur achieved fame and fortune largely because his views were in tune with the science and the politics of the day. Meanwhile, mainstream medical historians relegated Béchamp's ideas not as attractive to conventional thinkers. It went to the intellectual dustbin. Pasteur's promotion of germ theory, a flawed notion, and hence the word theory. Keep that in mind. Anytime you hear theory, just laugh. Theory of gravity. This is a theory. Nobody knows about gravity. That's just some scientific. So you could. Pasteur's promotion of germ theory, a flawed notion that he did not much discover as he did repackage, has remained dear to pharmaceutical companies' executives' heart upon the present day, having led to the groundwork for synthetic drugs, chemotherapy, radiation, surgical removal of body parts, and vaccines to become the medicine of our choice. The unshakable belief that there is one microbe for every illness is so integrated in the controlling medical idea for the Western world that the competing ideas about disease causation still have difficulty even gaining ground. Has anyone ever told you about terrain theory? In school, did we learn about it? No, we didn't. That's for a reason. Over a century after the two Frenchmen's demise, why bother to revisit their place in history? The answer is that scientific and industrial bias is in favor of Pasteur's model, and it has not served the public health interest. And to the contrary, two decades into the 20th century, dismal national and international health statistics utterly belie the hype about medical advances. In the U.S., for example, over half of all children have one or more chronic conditions. These are all new too, people. As does a comparable portion of millennials. And up to 62% of Medicaid population adults. 10 most healthcare dollars spent in the U.S., 86% are on patients with at least one chronic condition. Similar trends are on the rise around the world. For those who are able to steel themselves against medical propaganda, it is absurdly clear that the Pasteurian paradigm has failed to deliver. With Americans in such a shocking state of health, we cannot afford to let profit-driven pharmaceutical perspectives continue to dominate. As one writer more bluntly puts it, the sooner we get over the legacy of Pasteur's fake science and get back to reality. Okay. Deep. So, terrain theory versus germ theory. You guys get it now? They're saying, well, we're living in an environment. We're living in an environment like this. This is what it's like outside, you know? And all of our doctors are saying, create a little health bubble around yourself. Don't worry about this. Just worry about yourself. When all we need to do is worry about that, and we'll all be happy.
So how does herd immunity fit into that?
So herd immunity, from my understanding, is there's two definitions, but the one that I like to think about herd immunity is our exposure to something that could be potentially harmful if your terrain is off. And the more people that have the exposure and create antibodies, the more that the population that might be vulnerable can then deal with it, because the human immunal response is heightened. within a majority of people to the point where it's no longer infectious. Trying to think of an example of that, but we're going to get into more examples right now. So the terrain is everything, the germ is nothing, is what Louis Pasteur said on his deathbed. Louis Pasteur, the one that was credited with there's a single microorganism for every disease. Well, he admitted it on his deathbed. So germ theory versus terrain. Here we're going to get into it a little bit deeper here. Number one, disease arises from microorganisms outside the body. Germ theory. Disease arises from microorganisms within the cell of the body. Terrain theory. Microorganisms are generally to be guarded against. Is the germ theory. These intercellular microorganisms normally function to build and assist in the metabolic process of the body. Is the terrain theory. Function of a microorganism is constant. Is believed in the false germ theory. The function of these organisms changes to assist in the catabolic or the disintegration process of the host organisms when that organism dies or is injured, which may be chemical as well as mechanical. So that's the idea of the solvent or the cleansing agent. Shapes and colors of microorganisms are constant. Microorganisms change their shape and color to reflect the medium that they're in. Every disease is associated with particular microorganisms. Germ theory, cellular theory, or terrain theory is most organisms become pathogenic as the health of the host organism deteriorates. Hence, the condition of the host organism is the primary causal agent. Germ theory, disease can strike anybody at any time. Nope. The cellular theory is disease is built by unhealthy conditions. 8, to prevent disease, we have to have defenses. No, to prevent disease, we have to create health. Okay, you guys still with me? Okay, now we're going to get into some examples, because always when you talk about terrain versus germ, a lot of examples come out about viruses in the past, like polio. There is important, we always hear first, it's important to note that polio is a very common virus. It's all over, much like a cold or flu virus. Most Americans had or have the polio virus in their body at some point, although we are never tested for it unless we have paralysis. We all have dozens of different viruses in our system at one time, because that is how nature keeps our immune system stimulated. The paralysis that was blamed on polio virus in the 1940s and 50s was actually due to the widespread chemical pesticide spraying of DDT, a highly toxic, now banned pesticide. You guys following? So if you look at this, the polio death rate was decreasing on its own before a vaccine was introduced. So every time, if you look at these charts, this is the U.S. and Great Britain. Both lines represent each one. And if you look here, you start to see the decline from these peaks, and then they introduce the vaccines, and it keeps declining. But there was actually in polio in particular, there was a secondary outbreak of polio, which was more infectious due to the man-made polio virus that was given in the vaccine. And it was shed through human feces, they said. Okay, so this is important because it goes back to that thing of the microbe balancing the imbalance, and the terrain allowed for that polio virus to take hold because of the weakened immune response from the DDT. But the government health departments, along with chemical companies, were encouraging the spraying of DDT on American public. Mass DDT spraying campaigns took place on beaches, aerial over swimming pools and parks, especially during the summer months, aka farming season. Coincidentally, most polio paralysis cases happen during the summer months and in children. Parents were even encouraged to spray their children directly with the highly toxic chemical, as well as put it in their baths and other places where children had direct contact with DDT. As the weather ran through, polio ran through. Studies show the benefits of natural diseases. Pharmaceutical companies and the medical system love to vilify viruses. But are they really bad for your body? Science is discovering there are many benefits to common analysis, particularly in childhood, and theorize that viruses actually help train the immune system in a way that can reduce the risk of more serious issues later, including the likes of cancer. Yes, you read that right. Natural viruses can protect you from diseases later in life. For thousands of years, humans have lived synergetically with viruses and bacteria, and now science is discovering that they actually serve a purpose on our journey of transformation. Woo! Indeed. Okay, so now we're gonna keep the ideas in mind, and I'm gonna read from another educator, researcher about the same thing. When a body has a high degree of toxicity, bacteria feeding upon the toxic dead matter and tissue will be poisoned. When the body is at such a point of systemic toxicity where bacterial levels and all living microbes in the body have been diminished or killed due to the above reasons, the body will call upon the help of viruses to cleanse itself. When the body cannot utilize milder methods such as a cold or a bacteria, it will utilize the help of non-living protein solvents, which are known as viruses. I will show why this is the only logical answer. Viruses help consume and eliminate substances into small particles that can then be expelled via mucous membranes, out through the skin and through the intestinal tract. Cells produce viruses when the tissue are so toxic that phagocytes, parasites, bacteria, and fungi cannot help with the cleansing. Repair and regenerate their tissues and fluids. Science states incorrectly, without proof, that viruses originate outside the body, then hijack our RNA and DNA of the cell, and then replicate, whilst attacking our cells indiscriminately. Science falsely claims that viruses replicate themselves. In reality, it is the cell itself that reproduces the virus. Notice how viruses are manufactured by a healthy cell, but don't destroy the cell from which it was created. RNA and DNA is given by the host cell to dissolve specific substances within the body. If this was not the case, the virus would destroy the cell which created it, but it does not. The virus is ejected, damaging part of the cell, but not destroying it completely. The cell is then able to repair itself in time. Cells conspire as one unit to cleanse themselves and their surroundings so that new cellular activity can thrive. Large amounts of viral activity are present when the body is unable to use milder, living microbial detoxification methods to cleanse itself due to systemic toxicity of tissues that poison the living microbiome. That was your first line of defense. You guys get that? Are we understanding now this image of the fish tank? So, man, I don't want to say the word and all the hype, so you guys can just think about it. But you know what Okay, so what also comes up a lot when I'm talking about germ versus terrain theory is people will be like, well, you know, when I was younger, my mom went to the chickenpox party. You guys following me? Right? Because if my youth got the chickenpox early, he'll be able to deal with it better than getting shingles when he's an adult. Right? Correct. Right? Viral. Right? Okay. When we went to the chickenpox party, did every kid get chickenpox? When we put the jar out to collect lactic acid bacteria, does it go in there every time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So why did some kids get it and some kids didn't get it when we went to the chickenpox party? Because those kids' terrains were ready for it. The other ones might have been already beyond that point and didn't need it. Or maybe, I don't know the answer, but that's what we formulate these ideas. Another thing I want to get into though is this book right here is another book I recommend reading. It's called The History of Electricity and Life. There's something called the human biofield, electromagnetic energy that surrounds every living organism. This is confirmed science. This isn't just theory. Here's another picture of it put into something more imaginative of having a physical body, an energetic body, a mental body, an astral body, a celestial body, a soul body. So anyway, a lot of people say, well, how do these? If it's not germ theory, then how do these viruses or these sicknesses transmit? Well, a lot of science, and this isn't peer-reviewed or paper science, but this is coming out in the new research, is that viruses work on electromagnetism. So you can transfer a virus electromagnetically if the other host needs it. Then it will transfer. Also, another theory is pheromone transfer. So it's kind of like you walk into a room and that chicken pox party, we'll use that example again, and those kids were ready for it. They picked up the pheromone or the electromagnetic vibration. I don't know the exact science behind this, but this is just to get you guys thinking. Okay, well, why do you get cluster exposure? So here's a great example. The last cluster of what I'm not going to say was in McDonald's, right?
Terrain.
Can you put two and two together, folks? Make it come on, you guys. Anyway, I just want you to be aware of this electromagnetic body, and that it can also have sickness. You know, like this in different. This is an image, a real photo image of this energetic body, but sometimes you'll have dips or pieces missing, and those are all signs of you having an imbalance. Anyway, I just wanted to share those other ways that we could possibly share these certain sicknesses without it being germ theory. You guys follow that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly. So electric health, okay. Oh, that's the one thing I wanted to touch on real quick, because we got this electric body, right? So what happens if you change the electronics or the millimeter waves in the atmosphere? Because you have an electronic body, that your heart is electronic. This is scientifically proven. It has an electrical pulse. Your brain has an readable by meters, by man-made gadgets. So this is not far out things you need to believe. It's just plain simple science. So what happens, say the human body has been on this planet for thousands of years, and then all of a sudden you introduce radio waves to the atmosphere. And think about a radio wave, because I could take an antenna and stick it up right here and we could listen to music. You could go down the street and hear the same music. You can go to the beach and hear it. So these things are omnipresent. It's not just like, no, when I want to catch it, I catch it. It's hitting you right now, regardless of you wanting to catch it. So what's going to happen to this sphere if all of a sudden now there's radio waves in the air? Okay, sweet radio waves. How about cellular millimeter waves in the air? What's going to happen to the body? And why do you see, and this is proven too. I know you guys have probably seen it on Instagram and stuff. But why do you see sicknesses ramping up with every new development of millimeter wave pollution? You need to take this into consideration as well. You have to. You have to. I know you guys have seen this stuff on Instagram and whatnot, where the doctors talk about radio waves. Then they had a Doppler radar, and then they had 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now we're getting ready for the smallest, tiniest millimeter wave to be put on every single telephone pole, so you can have a Netflix fast. I wonder how much of us are going to survive, or how much of us are going to need a cleansing from
that
that.
goes through the little spaces.
Right, yeah, right, exactly. It's going to go right
really
through.
good, but
Right.
now it's getting worse and worse. So you better get your energy level better.
Right. Now let's talk about chi building. Let's talk about exercise. Let's talk about Nyabingi, drum, and chant. Let's talk about why Native Americans would gather by the hundreds to dance for rain to come out of the sky, and it would come. You think they would keep dancing like that if it didn't work? No. That shit worked every time. They could even tell the cloud to go there and tell the cloud to go there. That's our human ability that we've lost, has been stolen from us. Why do the Africans jump fucking hours? You know? I mean, come on. We're charging this human biofield so nothing can hurt us. But if we don't do these things and we sit at home, play video games, eat junk food, okay, don't complain when you get sick then. Or welcome the sickness as a cleansing, you know? And then get your life on track. You know? So that's just my, we are guardians of the earth. It's our role to take care of this planet, right? I'm going to leave you with one more thing if there's no more questions. And then we'll do some lunch too after this, and the break is on. Looks like we're right on time. Okay. Just want to make sure I got all of this stuff. Yeah, possible modes of infection, pheromonal, electromagnetic. Anything else written down? Okay, so I'm going to leave you with this reading out of this book, The Road Back to Nature, by one of my heroes and mentors, Masanobu Fukuoka. He's asking about the agriculture for tomorrow. Natural farming offers. So the message is that the future is bright. It's not dim or dismal. The future is abundant, it's healthy, and it's positive. And he says that the current methods of farming will have to be replaced with easier methods, healthier methods. This is why natural farming is more a way of farming for the future than of the past. The natural farmer is able to gaze at the moon reflected in the many paddy fields and enjoy a quiet life free from the cares of the world. True human life through natural farming in the family vegetable garden. That is the ideal. So I'm going to finish reading this, but I want you to imagine a better future when I read this. I want you to imagine the possibilities that we hold if we could only change our minds a little bit. If the laws were changed, instead of everyone converging in Tokyo or other big urban centers, the 120 million Japanese could spread out over the 15 million acres of arable land in this country has. That's a quarter acre for each of the 60 million adults. So he's proposing a new way of life, a new way to have an economy, to live. And some of us are already practicing this new way. But this is what it's going to take. The system's going to fall, and they're going to try to take us down with them. We need to create our own systems that work. And that's why we're here today, actually. Secretly, I'm indoctrinating you guys into thinking for yourself. What?
Freedom?
No way. Come on. Yep. So 60 million adults. He's saying that every adult in Japan could have a quarter acre, and that would be enough to feed him and his family. Without using machinery, they could build a house on their plot of land. They could grow everything they need there. Vegetables, fruits, grains. If, in order to create a surrounding shelter belt, they planted a single black wattle seed or sapling each year, then in 10 years' time, even without a single drop of petroleum, everyone would have plenty of fuel for their home. Japan is large enough to make this possible. So he's giving us a blueprint of success. People will object, well, what about my car? What about this and that about my life? I gotta go do my thing, you know? Yet, we're prepared to reject the sort of lifestyle where everyone runs around in cars, and we're willing instead to enjoy life on a mountain retreat. All the absolute necessities are right there at the feet. One could enjoy a spiritual elevated life without the least privation or inconvenience. Ideally, this would take the form of small, self-reliant communities. Again, here's the blueprint. all matters would be taken care of right on the family farm. Why do we need the police if the mother and father are doing their jobs? Right? The home, the community, and the country, all products of the nature in the region. So we would eat bioregionally. We wouldn't import anything. We wouldn't need to export anything. That's not the economy that we're trying to obtain. Fully capable of self-sufficiency and self-reliance. This is a must. When this happens, then all the people of the world will at least be able to join hands in a position of equality. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions about the micro presentation? Drake is going to go up right after lunch and he's going to blow your guys' minds with some. This guy, he's a microbial genius. So now that we laid this foundation down of what microbes are, why they're here on Earth, and why we like them, Drake's going to come blow your guys' mind right after lunch. So over here, 10% off at the deli, and you guys could enjoy some lunch. We're going to come back right at 12:30, so we got about 35 minutes, 40 minutes. Good, thanks. Yes, sir. On my K&F journey, I took a level 1 class from Master Cho and also a level 3 class from Master Cho, but took Drake's level 2 class, which he still offers out on Hamakua Coast. So if you're right here at the school, we've been doing like 2-day workshops. Drake offers, what is it, 7 or 10? 7-day workshop. Yeah, I'm trying to streamline. He offers a 7-day workshop. So I feel like our 2-day workshops really get the job done if you're like on the level of that, receiving that information that compact. But if you want to see all the processes from start to finish, I highly recommend going to his 7-day course, because throughout the course you get to see the IMO box set out, and 3 or 4 days later you get to see the IMO box collected, where at my class I'll show you pictures of the IMO and I'll show you a jar of the IMO too, but you won't witness the process. So definitely take that class if you can. You can tell them you're going to be offering it again maybe before we start. But also, he's going to present about microbes, and it looks like we're actually going to get a lot of good K&F stuff here at the class too, which is super awesome. So, without further ado,
So thanks Logan, thanks for this place, thanks for everyone for showing up and being here, learning about solutions that we have. Who here is unfamiliar with me? So most people in here are actually familiar because I've been involved in Korean natural farming, right? And so I've been kind of instrumental sharing videos and just getting information out and kind of translating like what was in the Eastern world into Hawaii as a destination, and now it's expanding further to like America, Canada, Europe, kind of like the other way around the globe. So I've been studying this since 2007, but ultimately you'll find out when you get into microbes, you've been studying them your entire life, no matter what you did. You just weren't very good at studying previous to like being consciously aware. So once you understand that we're constantly watching all these guys, you can start to pay more attention. So I made this presentation. I had a lot of fun with it. I always make new presentations when I make things because I like to always keep it fresh and exciting and going. So you guys get my first series of animated presentations. They've all been boring PowerPoints prior to this, right? But now I've upped my game and I got a Galaxy Note 9 and I just sketch these ideas that are really hard to conceptualize sometimes, right? Because microorganisms, you think are so big, I can't, how many? But if you draw them out and you anamorphize them, that's a word. they come to life, right? And we can get to know them, and then we can start to relate to them because now they're part of us and part of our understanding. So what Logan wanted me to talk about was microbes and the unseen world. So I'm going to just show a little bit about this, and that's what he was talking about. But if you look at my slide, you see these guys are my microbes here. And these guys represent kind of beneficial microbes. But he's unlocking, soil fertility. And these guys here are my neutral microbe characters. And they tend to have, different issues throughout their life. But they learn throughout the story. And then I want to give a hat tip to Master Cho because my knowledge, my learning comes from Master Cho, comes from a long lineage of many masters throughout time in natural farming. But specifically the recipes and my knowledge, he's one of the persons that has synthesized it the best into kind of some rules that you can then extrapolate to build UFOs and So what I want to bring it to is this. This is what Logan was talking about earlier, but choose your team. How many of you realize that each and every moment that you're selecting a team and you're a part of this invisible war? Right? The president was just talking about this stuff, the invisible enemy, this invisible war. We've always been in this. But for years and years, the environment was pristine, beautiful, amazing. And so it was like a car with a full gas tank. We just kept driving. We never realized we had to put gas in the car because it was always full. Our environment, we started with full resources and just keep taking them out. And we never really realized, we gotta put some back in. So imagine we have a car and we're just driving, we're using it, we're like, this is so great, this is so awesome, can we go faster? Yeah, let's go faster. But we never realized we had to put gas in the car. And what we're realizing now is that to get to this level of complexity, the world had to be really good and really beneficial because this expansion of whatever we are comes to this high level in a very non-toxic environment. But as we start to toxify the environment, it goes back down. And that's what Logan's been talking about. But here I kind of anthropomorphize it to really figure out how to say the word right before I say it again. But these guys are representing kind of evil. It's not just this, and these guys are representing kind of good. So it's a battle between good and evil, but majority of the microbes here in the center are what we call neutral microbes. And so 50 to 70% of the microbes are these microbes that aren't on team good, they're not on team bad, they're just chilling in the center. And so what we do as natural farmers is we try to identify, okay, how can we make our soil more good? Because for us, that means our plants growing better, right? And this is, bad microbes. Not that they're good or bad, but if I had a lot of bad microbes, my plants would be dying. If I had a lot of good, my plants would be doing better, right? It's a general concept there. So in general, good microbes, they bring cakes and cookies. The tree feeds them sugars from sunlight, and they'll go retrieve minerals, and they'll trade it for cakes and cookies. Sugar, wheat, all that stuff baked together. When things aren't so good, you have the bad microbes that show up, and they bring drugs and alcohol. Not good drugs, bad drugs. Not good alcohol, really good alcohol. And people get wild, right? But majority of microbes aren't bringing goods, they're not bringing bads, they're actually this center. So for this guy, this neutral guy, he's just like, I obey the majority. Whoever is in power, I'll do it. It's entirely exactly like it, right? So right now, and this is going to get even more into humanity, especially probably with this group, because life can seem evil, right? Look out at the world, we say, it's all evil, it's all like all this crap falling down, breaking, systems collapsing. And we think this good versus evil, and it can seem like it's really, you're alone, right? If you're one good microbe, right now it seems like you're surrounded by all these other microbes that are maybe like destroying the soil or dumping toxins around or imbalancing the nature somehow. But remember, majority of people you encounter, majority of microbes you encounter are actually in this neutral part. I mean, good or bad, they just kind of go along. So if the guys come in and there's not a lot of food available, and you just get depression, these guys bring in the good, they bring in the alcohol. And what happens is your neutral microbes, which were this 50%, they start to side with the evil microbes. Because when times are bad, they bring in the drugs and alcohol, and they all think, oh, well, that's the party I want to join. So what happens is, instead of just having, where before you had this, I had 25%, these guys lose a little bit of a percentage, these guys gain a majority because drugs are coming into the town, and everybody becomes a drug addict. It's just this way. So not only now are you only fighting against this, this 30% of people that are actually wicked, you actually now have 80% of this whole that appears bad, but 50% of them are just chilling. And really the only shift that has happened between this one here and that one there was the good went down 5% and the bad rose 5%. So it wasn't like all these evil people came in, just the good people got a little less good, the bad people got a little more bad. It was a small imbalance. It wasn't like all the people became bad or good. The bad only went up 5%, good only went down 5%, and now 80% became bad. See how this works? So all of a sudden my soil went from being like just a 5% change in my microbes, now it's 80% pathogenic. What happened? Well, just 5% change, now all my plants are dying. I couldn't change the whole microbiome, but that little bit, and these neutral guys that are the swing voters. Now you understand why they go campaign in the swing states. They make the difference. Yeah, exactly. Wow. So up here in the corner it says, you're good, we're good. So these neutral guys, they're just chilling. They don't mean good or evil, whatever, they go with where it's at, right? So this is why life can seem evil, because if you're on team good and all of a sudden you're against 80%, because team evil's in charge, you see everything around you evil, but only about 5% has changed. So what it's about from being good to bad is right here. These guys, these neutral microbes. Today's mood, they're just neutral. I'm mad, they're not sad, well, this guy's kind of happy, but today's mood, he's just chilling. And he goes and he says, well, I'll work for food. Whoever's going to pay me, I'll work for the food. And they just go around and they look for leaders. They look for people that want to lead them. Who's going to give them stuff? Who are they going to follow? And so what can happen here is if you feed your friends, just being one small person, you feed these people around you, and then they rise to prosperity, they start to feed their friends around them, they start to feed their friends around them, they start to feed their friends around them. And pretty soon from the whole idea of like you can make personal change within one person and it changes the world, it's this exact example here of this one person decided to feed their friends around them and nourish them, and it created this whole ripple effect, which can ripple out into all of these neutral microbes. Because you don't have to change everybody, it's only, you just change the little 5%. So. And they prefer to eat cakes and cookies. Everybody given free choice chooses like good, nourishing foods, but given poor conditions, what Logan was talking about, your terrain gets real bad, like buildings are run down, everything. You're gonna choose to drugs, right? You're like, well, screw this. I'm just gonna check out of this reality and be somewhere else. But all of us, it feels good to love. It feels good to build. It feels good to get creator. It also feels good to smash it. But this feeling of good, this reward system, this building, is actually preferred. They've done studies with rats where they'll change the environment and they'll actually stop doing drugs and go towards the good things. It's really based on your environment. So with that knowledge, with knowing that, our big influence, also is big people, huge things compared to these microbes. At most, our influence is about 5% of what's happening in the soil. Like I was saying, that percentage is small, it's only about 5%. But we can get an 80% return. So if I just change that 5%, what happens is these guys flip-flop, where before it was this 80% was bad, and just changing that 5%, bringing that 5% over to this side, now all of a sudden 80% became good. So at just a 5% investment, I got an 80% return. If you're into economics and that kind of thing, that's usually pretty good. Could be wrong. So what I do, our big influence is this 5% to get 80% return. What I do is I just talk and tell people about microbes, tell them about the microbiome, tell them about these things. You know, that's how can I be a huge influence to change the world? Or if I drive all the way over here, tell people, get people excited, get people stoked. Tell you that it's not such an insurmountable problem trying to fight 80% of our problems, but it's a matter of more enriching just that little 5% of us here, enriching our 5%, and all of a sudden now that the neutral microbes flip-flop, we all become the majority and 80% majority of help.
Yes, I.
So my influence, I can talk to you, I can speak to you, I can inspire you, I can do those things. But the other thing I can do is I can take direct action. And this is, that's how I draw myself, I don't know why. But this is me, and what I'm doing is I'm spraying the police. I'll get to that part, it's 3 weeks ago, that wasn't bad to say, and I can also spread cakes, cookies, and slices of bread. Only if you slice a little bit this way. I think big something. But I can do a big influence by just spreading those 5% of little microbes, get some fruits in there, get some good food. Now I'm starting to ease that stress for these microbes. But I can also go and collect some of the best microbes from my area, and I can go through this alchemical process of bringing in these high vibes into the huge dynamic. I don't want to go into that. And then I can spread them out. And when I superpower and educate more microbes, then they have an even bigger influence than me. So if you guys became teachers, if you guys went out and had, that would be analogous to this. But literally, if the good microbes get up and they start leading and they start, put them out there and they're well fed and you put them into your soil, the other microbes will turn around and they want the king of peace. They want to turn this way. They want the cakes and cookies. But we need leaders and we need the soil life to be there. So it's terrain, environment, all these things. And when we stand up and we lead, then all of a sudden this, like I said, this 80% comes to our side for just a 5% investment. So if you follow that, that is like my simple basic premise. It comes back to this. Is it good versus evil? Really, it's more about soil stress. Stress is usually things from out of balance. No fungus. Fungus are the life that transports things around so they can't move things. No biochar. Biochar is what they store things in the soil with, so there's no storage capacity. And they have no leadership, because in our modern age, whether our farming practices or just ubiquitously the amount of toxins raining from us when we burn fossil fuels in the atmosphere, all those other things, they've lost their transportation, their storage, and their friends in the soil. So why do we have rapid opiate death here in Kona? Because the microbes that were mining the soil and getting the nutrients for the opiate are like, bro, hang on, I gotta clean this up. And the toxins that we're ubiquitously putting around the world, they gotta clean for 2 hours. Then they can feed their tree. Next day, there's 3 hours of cleaning, 2 hours of feeding. Next day, there's 4 hours of cleaning, 1 hour of feeding. Because we put more and more toxins out there, so the microbes are no longer feeding their partners. They're actively cleaning the soil. You gotta protect yourself before you can be productive outside. And we've switched the entire ecosystem into protection mode. So all of our trees around every forest are dying. Why? Because the microbiome is dying. And you'll notice they're dying from the outside in. The fungus, the core, the inside is really strong inside. So they'll core the forest, they'll still find good microbes, but all the periphery, everything's dying. And it's because the microbes they're stressed out. They're too busy cleaning healthy trees. And that's just my theory. I can say it to you. It's true, but please research that. Please fact check it on that. Find out if it's real. So what most microbes are trying to do is they're trying to be good, but it depends on the food. So and I'll get into what I mean by these foods. It's kind of a high level thing, but you can understand if I stop feeding you guys and I leave and I lock everyone in this building, you guys are gonna fight pretty soon, right? But imagine I lock you in this building and there's a bathroom and it's a lot of people. What? Yeah, okay. So if I take the hat, they start fighting right away. But so that's the same thing. It's not this. It's not like things want to be good or bad. It's like the stress around, right? That environment. There's plenty of like you get a real big tough guy and you give him a bunch of food. He's probably gonna chill out and eat some food eventually, you know. But without the food, you're probably you might get hurt. Without like how do you apologize? You just cooking cookies. But it's really this. Are you living this graph here, where we're in the good, the majority up there, where it's only that they're only 5% more. This is only, it's only 5% to make this 80% good. Or are you over here? And how is this divided? This 20, 50, 30. Is it 30% good or is it 30% evil? And that determines where the majority this neutral microbes go. And so oftentimes the reason I bring this up is a lot of our solutions are all about kill the bad guy. If I spend energy killing the bad guy, I'm never going to boost the good guys. So I'm always, and if I kill 100% of the bad guys, guess who's next? The next baddest good guy. And there's always bad guys. You can never get rid of all the bad guys. If I got rid of all the bad guys, who's that? Like that next guy is you're the baddest guy. And with this, I got a different analogy. My friend Grey Wolf always says, smoke your good weed first, because then you're always smoking your good weed. What's the best I got? Right? Well, that was swag a month ago, but hey, it's the best from today, right?
Definitely.
No, so there's always this thing of you say, oh, we're going to get rid of the bad guys. Well, guess who's the next bad guy? You're going to be next on that chopping block of going that way. So what's better, what I'm saying, is let's just focus on giving this our team, the team Benefish, a little bit more help. And all of a sudden, the 80% goes from being evil to being like, hey, we're just going to flip-flop to the other side. So that's my whole theory on this of the hidden world, what we're doing. And it's really that simple. It's really, yeah.
So you said soil stress is when there's no fungus, no biochar, no leadership. Because the fungus is transportation, the biochar is storage, and the leadership is
the leadership, I was going with, that's the microbes working together.
okay.
The leadership, what he was saying, that like you can choose the spraying those good microbes are now your leaders. Once you inoculate
It's
the
a
good
flip-flop.
microbes, you're giving them leadership with the intelligence of that IMO or that good microbiology.
Okay.
Those become your leaders.
Yeah.
Where right now we're devoid of that.
So you're creating one.
Yeah. And so what it's analogous to get back to that leadership part, what it's analogous to is what we do in natural farming is we go to a good, rich area, we take some of the best things, and then we send them through like an education process, and then we put them back to the same community.
So those are your leaders.
Yeah. So that's in an analogous way. That's what we're doing. That's how we're building these leaders. Is identifying the good leaders, giving them all the food and resources they need to really thrive. Leadership training and putting them back.
And that's your IMO 1 through 5, which would be more dove into in a straight K&F class.
So basically here, the whole idea for this with the microbes is to master the basics, because we can only make a tiny difference. We can't make this huge difference anyway. You have to find these alliances in the soil. You have to get those neutral microbes on your side. know, and so you can only make that tiny difference. So in the K&F basics, it's really basic. If you've studied Korean natural farming, you may have heard some acronyms and some things flying around in this vocabulary that people sound like wizards when they're talking about it. That's some heavy stuff, but I've changed the names to be real simple. And not changed, but translated them as they came across from east to west. The language I decided to put them in is food, cleanser, structure, medicine, and minerals. Now, there's no question in anyone's mind, when should I use food? All the time. When do you want food?
Consistently.
When you're hungry, how much do you want to eat? The right amount.
Right.
And these same concepts come across. So on the far right over here, Adam was asking me, if I want to break down wood chips, can I just add more fission amino acids, more nitrogen to this process? And I asked him, I said, Adam, I want Adam to work real hard. I want him to chop these trees down. Should I feed Adam 5 times the steak he wants to eat? Is he going to do a better job chopping that shit down? What should I, instead, I should probably just give him the right amount of food he wants to eat, more frequently, right? At the right frequency. Instead of trying to, you're going to chop all this wood, eat the 5 things. Or as he's working, and I see, bro, you know, here's some you've been chopping, here's a bit more, here's a bit more. So when I bring this into food, you think, oh, can I dose my plant more? Can I give my animal? If you start to think of it as food, it's like, well, yeah, sure, you could jam a bunch of food into your plant. What's it going to do? Cute. If my plant's dirty, say I got powdery mildew on my plant, should I use a cleanser? City mold, I got some weird stuff happening, some weird bacterial stuff growing around in my garden. Should I use a cleanser?
Yeah, maybe a little medicine too.
But that's why I translated these things this way, because this would have been BRV, a cleanser. When do I use BRV? I don't know. When do I use a cleanser? Shit is dirty. When do I use structure? Yeah, say my plant, like, oh, it's starting to droop, it's getting too heavy, it's over nitrogen, a little heavy and heavy at the tips. Needs a little more structure to perk it out. Right, what else is the biggest thing that provides structure for your plant? Oh, this is I'm real simple here. Water is the number one answer. It's always wins.
Any phosphorus? Nothing.
Good structure. Most structure to the plant.
The water was there.
What has the most structure in the plant? Come on, dude.
Branches.
I can't believe I get distracted now.
Roots.
Boom! Josh Williams. Oh, you said
Yeah. It's all good.
He'll take the
Yeah, whoever.
The roots, right? What provides more structure than anything in your plant? What's the most important thing growing in your plant? Is it the top? Is it the thing you can see? Or is it the roots that are gonna put the energy? So when you say structure here, this also happens to be calcium phosphate, which we know is extremely good for growing roots. Alpha. It's good for a number of things. But when I call it structure, and you think, oh, I want to grow more roots, I want to put more structure to my plant. That's why I translate it this way. Say my plant's a little sick, it's not doing so well. Medicine's the obvious one. And what about if it looks a little emaciated? I could go and look at some chart, right? I could pull up some chart and I could say, oh, it's a phosphorus deficiency, it's a this deficiency, it's this, that's that. I could chase all these minors and things. Or I could also say, man, I'm just going to give it a dose of every trace mineral at a really dilute rate, and the microbes can actually assemble it with enough char in the soil pull out the trace minerals it needs. And that emaciation, whether I go with the chart or I just put diluted seawater and all of the minerals, and that was a lot cheaper. And let the microbes be the ones that do the actual dosing for your plant, and to be the interface between you and your plant. So is that making sense with these minerals? So when I went through there's 9 of these, but I just went through 5, and all those. Does that make sense? Those things. What's hungry? What should we do?
So, with neutral microbes, does their function change when they're transitioning to be beneficial, or does the morphology change radically?
The microbiome, how it interrelates in complexity, is so impossible to even understand. But in general, when there's lots of food, the right amounts, fertility is the result. More complexity is the result. When there's stress conditions, it's usually breaking things down when the opposite. So with this, with what I recommend, is I talk about making good microbes, and we'll go over that briefly. But I talk about make the good microbes, make these piles, make buckets of it, spread it around. Once you do that, then you'll have healthy animals, healthy plants, healthy water, and then that transforms into a whole healthy item, coming. But it started at the smallest level. It started at this microorganisms, understanding this. Before I could go up to those levels, I kind of had to know that it started at the basics, master the basics. We often want to go and reforest, the mountains and stuff. Great, but we also need to put the microbes underneath and rebuild the topsoil as we do the forest. And so it's like, meeting permaculture and the microbes below the soil at the same time. And so if you understand, okay, we're going to get good microbes and go this way, we'll have that foundation under us. So in this, in K.N.F. in general, I talk about the 9 solutions. All these are different tools. As different as a saw is from a hammer. I wouldn't try to hit a nail in with a saw, and I wouldn't try to cut something with a hammer. Nevertheless, I bet someone challenged me to put money on it. I bet I could do it, right? I bet I could do it. And just like these are adaptable. Sure, you can bang something in with the wrong tool, but if you learn how to use them right, then you can become a master craftsman. With just these basic tools, and sure, you can get more, right? But this is like your skill saw and your hammer. It's not like your, I don't know, some weird tool with drywall. No, this is your basic stuff, okay? So sure, you can get more refined tools, but if you have this basic set, you can then dream about being able to, take this guy and then be to balance. Because you are.
Avatar microbe.
And the reason I bring up those 9 solutions is this is kind of what I'm up to. Microbes can end climate change, but most of them are like these neutral beds that are just chilling. They're like, we can end it, but and they're begging us like, let's end it. But really, it's our choice, right? Are we going towards neglect of our animals, which leads to deserts? Are we going to respect of our animals, which leads to forests? And it's our choice that, are we going to stabilize the climate? These are what holds your moisture and soil structure. These guys are topsoil. And are we going to, each and every one of us can actually be the solution to this. Because climate change seems huge and daunting. But in the same trip I just drove over here from Haile, I could have had a microorganism sprayer in my car and been spraying the roadside. And my trip over here could have had a net ecological benefit. I think it might still anyway, but but I could be, permaculture, function stack at every opportunity, right? It's true, I did. It's true. It's better I put it in the parking lot over there. Don't tell that mini market. But really, the whole thing of this, because these microbes are climate change. What holds your moisture? What defines your climate? Why why does it stop raining when we cut the trees? What's the microbes that were bringing the water cycle and the whole deal? Like, you can go read about that in books for ages. But really, it's over here. Today, it's a media war. What are we told we can do today that's effective for the current condition? Social distancing, wear masks. It's a media war in terms of there are so much more solutions we can be doing. We can actually spread beneficial probiotics. We can inoculate our gut. We can take care of this terrain. Instead of just taking care of our social distance, is actually I can go out into the world and make it a safer place for my kiki to run through the yard. Did they pick up good microbes on them, or did they pick up, whatever? Right? Did they pick up stress microbes or healthy microbes? And so this is it, like help us help you, it says in the corner. And the other guy is holding up a sign that he's protesting for better soil leadership now.
Yes. Now.
But it's really, this is what Logan was getting. It's about cooperation. It's getting to know your silent majority. They always bring this stuff up. Silent majority, this, that, which I hate those things. This is me. I'm only 10% human. Who's the silent majority? It's all those members of me that can't speak, right? They're just telling me, like, take some more mushrooms. Tell the truth. Right? No, but I'm only 10% human. If you look at my DNA, DNA is my resonance, it's my guide, it's my matrix point. Where's the blueprint to bring me in? And once you get to know the science, it's this cooperation. It's this animals, plants, the whole deal. I guess I enjoy plants. It's animals and humans. This is the paleo wheel. But you can grow all this great stuff with this, and really, so I bring this up. It's the cooperation fits into that, but it's what I call a microbial secret society. That you have a secret society within you. You have a fully living operational thing with rights and honors and degrees and all these things that they maintain for you, and you are their grand master. So if we get to know them, and I'm just going to go through these 9 solutions pretty quick. Basically, what we do in natural farming is, out of these 9, 2 of them are microbes. So I've been talking about microbes this whole time. Now I'm actually going to bring these down, that theoretical stuff, into these tools. And how can you actually take what I've talked about and put it into your farm and into action? So if you understand these tools a little bit, then we'll go through a little bit of the recipe. So we recognize in natural farming 2 distinct sets of microbes. One of those is what I just generally call microbes, because it wouldn't be very creative, are the indigenous microbes. They're like the citizens, they're like us, they're everywhere. But there's a second set, and these are called the police and or the medics. But these guys are like the law enforcers, the guys that can come in if there's a problem within the microbes and there's someone upset, like there's a bank robbery that's causing the police can be called, and they're specially equipped to deal with emergency. Say we run out of food and everyone starts rioting. Well, then you can call in the police, and with the right, as a farmer, I can bring in, use this, like my microbes are going crazy, they've run out of food, they're stressed. I can then add some police into that as I give the food to them, and those police are then there to escort them and bring it. Like, imagine some utopian thing. I know right now everyone's saying the police are not supposed to do that. Yeah, the theoretical police. That's what I should call it.
Yeah.
Peacekeepers?
But they're there to escort, to bring that food in. Say all of a sudden there's an outbreak of powdery mildew. I can add the police in along with my other solutions, and now these police will go in and help to quell that powdery mildew. They'll deliver the medicine, they'll bring the food, these other things. So there's these 2 sets of microbes. The one that are like us, that are just general, law-abiding, good citizen type folks, and then there's the police. And so these guys can be called in when you have an emergency. But if you call the police for stuff you don't need them for, they might hurt you. And they're expensive. So you don't always want to be using these guys. You want to use them sparingly, and that's why they're separated again from the regular microbes. Because I can call these guys in specifically when I need them. So these are the two general sets of microbes we recognize. There's general IMO, which means whatever's growing there, and hopefully it's the forest fungal or other food. And then the other is the lactic acid bacteria, and or it's the people. So with those guys, these next 4 solutions of the 9 are the main things we use all the time. What do you need all the time?
Food. Cleanser. Come on, do it.
Wow, you guys need the same thing. Yeah, we all need food, right? We need the right time, right place, right thing, right? Gotta feed the baby the right food, gotta feed the adult the right food, gotta train the athlete for certain food. All of this matters, right? All this makes a difference. The cool thing about this recipe is you can tune it to whatever you want. Say you want something to grow in the veg stage. You can pick a food that encourages vegging. You can tune the food to your type. So it's a general recipe. The next is the cleanser. This is just a vinegar, a fruit vinegar. It's real simple, it's real easy. Did you guys know that vinegar contains a whole bunch of amino acids? Who's ever thought, oh, I gotta get, you would think, oh, I gotta get nitrogen, like aminos, like nitrogen stuff. Who's ever thought of thinking, oh, I'll use vinegar? It looks a little nitrogen deficient, I'll throw in some vinegar. Nobody's ever said that, right? Living vinegar is chock full of amino acids. These are the building blocks of DNA. These are what build protein.
Fungi also eat amino acids as a food source.
Totally.
Building
totally.
blocks.
So it'll feed your fungus as well. So there's all kinds of things in this cleanser besides just the cleaning power of vinegar. Like you drink brown rice vinegar to alkalize your body. Same thing. The medicine is just like these herbs. Who eats, I guess I couldn't eat meat but who eats chicken just with chicken? Who prefers chicken with ginger? You'd rather have ginger chicken over just chicken?
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing in this scenario. This food, you can't just have food. You gotta have a little bit of spice and herbs in it. So this is garlic, cinnamon, licorice, and gelatin. All those things have incredible medicinal properties, but they also spice up your food. Without it, that sugar is boring. And then the last one is structure. And all of us, we need this structure to be in here to gather, to make useful places in space. Same like your plant does. But the plant doesn't have an extra home. It lives in its own home. And so this structure gets absorbed into its body. And that's when, so these 4 things combined, I put all these into that jar over there, which is this maintenance formula. And I use this all the time. It's super easy. I just take 25 milliliters per gallon of this stuff, pour it in, and I've got my food, my cleanser, my medicine, my structure. Taking care of all the basics of what my plant, animal, or myself needs with one solution I pour in. And I've made K&F as easy as putting on 25 mils per gallon. So,
Use that in foliar form or on the roots itself?
oh, yeah, but spraying foliarly is much more economical than drenching into the roots, and it depends on different scenarios. But if you're going to drench the roots, you probably want to do a more dilute, because you're going to add more water. If I just foliar something, if I watered the same amount of water onto the leaves, it would all drip down. Like a foliar, I'm just going to versus watering, I'm going to stand on water. So when you're watering, you can dilute more. You're going to put so much more water.
And you mentioned before using minerals when a plant works anemic or you mentioned feeding for microbes and all, and then we determine how much to give to the plant. But can you foliar feed as well? Do
these solutions are designed for that. The last three here are what we use for different types of growth phases. There's the fuel, which really helps to grow microbes in the soil. You know, think of it. You want to start something on fire, what do you add? You want it to go
Fuel.
faster. You want it to be warmer, all those things, right? So you want to boost things like that. If you overdo it, you may have to do a few other things. Like fuel can explode in your face. So you want to be a little careful. This reproduction here is calcium. There's all no calcium. And the last one is seawater. And I just wanted to kind of go over those 9, but really what I want to focus on is getting back to the microbes, and that's why starting here in the book that I gave you guys, which you guys can, if you want that book, you can keep it if you give me $30. And 5 of that goes to this for Logan here, fundraising for this. But if you don't want to keep it, then just bring it back over here. But if anyone needs a copy of the book right now, but the reason I give this to you is because I want you guys to take this home. I want you, if you've never done this before, do this tonight or tomorrow. It's so easy. You celebrate your 4th of July by declaring your microbial independence. Whatever, I don't know. Someone's smiling. West Bang. Yeah, we're American. Yeah, no, I know. But start here because this one only costs mere potatoes. If you can go get a few potatoes or you have some sort of starch left over, some rice, kalo, sweet potato, any type of starch. And what you're doing is you are brewing microbes in a liquid scenario.
We're gonna make this after class.
And they're going to do it today. So the basic idea is that you're taking water, microbes that you find right here in this area I want to go, some starch and some salt, and then you mix it into water. And what happens when you first mix it in? There's no. Okay, yeah. So here, real easy here. Here's the ingredients. This is why I say you can do it tonight, because everyone has this at home unless you don't eat potatoes. You don't have any buckets, no water. But I can help. Okay, so but just taking in a 5-gallon bucket of water, this dirt, which you'll see in person when you do it, and that's once you see it, you'll never forget. But you're looking for dirt right under where leaves are, where it's nice and balled up, forms these balls. You're not looking for white mold per se. You're looking for the soil that's right on the top that has really nice brown, good soil. It's very, very thin usually. It's about the top like 1/4 inch. Some starch and some salt. And you can see the ratios up there. You can scale this from as small as you want to as large as you want, as long as you're keeping your starch and your salt within reason. And what happens is when you first put it in, there's no bubbles. So you're starting here at time 0. There's and these ones, the green ones are the kind of not so good microbes, and the blue ones are like the soil microbes that we want. And so as soon as you mix it into the water, there's nothing. But after 12 hours, you'll see rings developing. And most of the time, mine finishes at 24 hours to 48. Depends on your temperature. I just drew this here at 72, but wherever yours finishes, scale this down wherever it finished, and that'll be your thing. But if you see what's happening is, in the beginning, what's happening is because there's starch and salt and water, the good microbes are going nuts. What happens is they eventually eat all the oxygen, and then these other anaerobic microbes start to take off. And so the whole key of what this graph says that is after I mix my barrel, my starch, my microbes, everything is in here, then I want to stop it before these nasty, stinky ones take off. I want to stop it when it's still in the sweet smell zone, which is between here and here, before these other sets of microbes make it stinky. In the beginning, no smell. Okay. So if you can understand this, it's just taking your microbes, and the ones we want to be good soil workers will grow first. And if right at this point where we got nice rings forming, before they've kind of like fallen apart and just those nice rings forming, you can then dilute that with more water and dump that wherever you want. So any questions on this disgustingly cheap microbe recipe?
When you say dilute it with more water, what are you talking about? Just like
So
diluting
this
it
here,
another bucket?
so this here is a 50-gallon
Also
recipe.
10 times.
Yeah, so in this case, I'd be diluting this 10 times, so 10-to-1 dilution of this.
Thank you.
How you dilute this matters. If it's more dry, you want to dilute it more. If it's been raining a whole bunch, you don't have to dilute it as much because there's more water. Just as you dump it over, there's more water around. But if it's really dry and you're in a drought, then increase this even to like this same recipe could do 100 gallons. You could do 10 to 1. Or this 20 to 1.
Mhm.
Yeah. But as long as this is not very exact. This is just that once your microbes have grown, you dilute them with about 10 parts more water and then put them on.
You ever found success using chlorinated water?
Yeah. Yeah, it works with chlorinated water. It works with pretty much anything.
Is this a similar process to the coffee farmers go through when they ferment their coffee?
Probably.
Morning, usually 8 hours later, it's sweet.
Yeah.
And then if you wait too long, it's sour.
I didn't mention that.
They're growing a specific microbe with certain conditions.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. Or it's like the open air ferments as well. Yeah, it definitely gets a lot of activity going.
Some nutrient water, you can then spray that or put that right back onto your crops too.
So this recipe here, it only takes, for me, it takes about 24 to 36 hours, and just fill it up and dump it over. And I just drench it. And I'll show you at the end how I'm doing things. Yep. That's a really good question. For the first recipe, that's the disgustingly cheap microbe recipe I showed you here, no, there's no benefit to going in. Just grab, like, under a pile of leaves where it's a little moist, you'll find this stuff. What I'm going to show you here, though, and that's what the disgustingly cheap one. Just get it wherever, and you're just growing microbes with just costing potatoes. But we don't just end there with natural farming, with Korean natural farming. That's not why we're, like, it's a growing movement because we just rot potatoes in a bucket and that's like our only secret. That's just a super crude way to get it so like it costs you nothing. Potatoes, do it, dump it into your drainage, everything. Now you're, your wasteland on the side of your house, now you're costing nothing. Now you're making a carbon sink and climate change. Stabilize the soil.
Remember those neutral microbes we talked about too, and just how a little bit goes a long way.
Yeah, you just bring in a little bit of good team, all the whole soil is just like good team, and they start making fertility instead of growing. So that is the first. I give you that recipe because if you haven't done it, do it. Do it and dump it someplace that you don't want to. Dump it on your neighbors, kind of thing. Like this is an act of civil disobedience, and like whatever you want to call it. What got Korean natural farming on the map, however, is this recipe. And this comes from Master Cho here. And what this is the point where you go hike up to a nice mountain, great fungal granddaddies, the best, like the Hualalai to the top kind of thing. I don't know if there's even impact forests up there. But you go to that area, and what you do is you create a box. And in this, you're putting rice or a starch in the bottom, and you have some airspace. And what you're doing is you're digging in to get down into the soil layer, and you're putting the box in direct contact with this soil microbes, you're taking the leaves that you put on, scrape away and put them over the top. And if you leave this out in the woods for about probably 4 to 5 days, this whole thing will fill up with the mycelium. And so this is why you would go to a good area to do this. The first recipe is just quick, dirty, easy. This one, now you're going to go on a more complex process. And what you should get from that is nice cotton candy IMO. It should be all nice at the top. If you did it in plastic, you cut off the hot air, you get all this. Who's grown this in their kitchen? Nothing special about it. This is not going to make your plants bang. It's everywhere. This, however, where they put it out in leaf litter, they use the bamboo dish. The microbes translate it across, and this is really a good collection, really acceptable. And then this one here is like, like K&F, like, it's the status in the community with this one. But when you have it bloom up, what you're seeing here is not the IMO. These are not the IMOs you're looking for. These are an indicator that the IMOs you're looking for are living in the rice beneath. These are just happen to be like the Bacillus subtilis and these other just nonchalant guys. These are the neutral microbes that are blooming. But why are the neutral microbes blooming? Why are the neutral microbes so happy? Because the majority underneath is team good. Okay, and so that's why this one here, majority was team bad, team good, team, so I'm not actually after the white fuzz. The white fuzz are the neutral microbes that are indicators of what the real granddaddies are underneath. Okay? So this is the how to do it. This is what put natural farming on the map. See how this is more complex. It's not just mixing dirt and things. It's like I actually got to grade what came out and make a value judgment of did I do it right. And if your rice is too wet or too dry, or you can mess it up a million times in 1,000 different ways, but when you get it right, you get a good collection. You've now gotten the leaders. That's the whole thing I was after, was the leaders. In the first one, when I was discussing with you guys, took whatever and put it in, just had a quick go. This, I now got the leaders. The 5% I'm looking for is 95% in this. Wow, that's the one I want. This is the whole reason to go through this whole process. Once you've got those guys, you then mix them with sugar, brown sugar. What that does is all the water, these are water molecules, they all go and they suck to the sugar. And the microbe that's in here has no more water to drink. What he does is he goes to sleep. And so after you've gotten your really good seed IMO, your rice box, you mix it with sugar, and then it goes into this kind of brown sugar goop. But that is all these microbes sleeping, just waiting. And then from that, you can just use this. This here is storable. This is your indigenous microbes. Those are those leaders. You can just take them, put them into a tea, mix it up, splash it around, you got good microbes on there. But you can go further, and that's to take those microbes and to put them into like a bokashi specialized compost. And this is where you've heard IMO 3, 4, where you're turning piles. And this is the whole thing that once you put it into a pile, then you get this temperature profile. And if you let your pile go away and it goes above 120 and it heats up here, you start to grow microbes that don't grow in nature. For all of us, if we're in a temperature above 120 degrees, we die. The microbes that interact with humans are the same way. Mm-hmm. It's not like they die in your pile, but your microbes you want are breeding, and then all of a sudden, these are like rave guys that just don't give a fuck about anything. And they consume all your resources while you're in the corner waiting to ask the girl. They took them all and made several generations. And then you get over here and you're like, how come this entire pile is rave kids? And it's like, nothing is too hot. It's too hot. And when the party is too hot, that's what it attracts. Rave kids are like, that party's banging. But they use all your resources. So if you have a pile, so So what happens with this is people ask me all the time, is this good IMO? I ask all the time, is this good IMO? Is this good? Because this process is really challenging. But it's really temperature dependent. It's like, am I over 120 degrees? And if you are, he's like, I smell it, I smell it. And he's like, well, maybe you're too hot. He's like, maybe. And then I get out the microscope and I look and I see all these rave kids. Rave kids. I'm like, no wonder you're sick. And I'm like, well, what's the solution? Well, we gotta bleed the system. Right? So we flip it, right? And when you flip it, you take the real hot rave kids, the ones that have, they're listening to this like really unique trap, filthy music, and you mix those guys to the outside, and they bring that really dank stuff. These guys that are more in the country folk. And then the diversity that comes out of this, of bringing the hardcore slap to the country and the mixing of this pile, is actually creates more diversity for me. And so what I end up with after this process is some really, really rich, well-trained leaders, as long as I don't let the rave kids get out of control. You're not a rave kid. No, I used to be.
I used to be. So then I balanced myself. Right?
You know.
Oh yeah, I was doing that photography for
It's all we're all.
So diversity.
So this process, you can go and you can really train. If you keep your leadership school together and you really keep a good pile, it's as if you've trained your microbes for 1 week is the equivalent of 10,000 years in the microbial world. So where for me, this took a 1 week process to keep this below 120 degrees. I got to turn it 20 times a day. It's a real involved process. When I'm done, I now have 600 pounds of the best leadership fungal spores that then I just I don't even know where that's from. I love that. I just put a little bit out there and that's why this is so powerful. So why is K&F on the map? Because of this process of these microbes, of this training process to go through these piles to keep it low temperature. And there's an additional step beyond this, which is to blend it with your indigenous soil. So for 10,000 years, the most highly advanced microbes are learning how to make pots and electricity and irrigation and everything they need in the soil out of your soil. So then when you take them and you train them for 10,000 years to use your soil and you put them into your soil, you're like, oh, this is great. This is exactly what we need. Yep.
Plus you're giving them massively available food, right? Probiotic massively available food, herbal energy drinks basically, but
perfect environment for them.
Yeah.
And every time you graduate your microbes up a stage, you record them with great food, good entertainment.
How do you know when it's done?
Training.
How do you know when it's done? This is a great question. It's because the temperature profile at the back of the slide, it finishes out here. How do I know it's done? Because the temperature comes back to room temperature. When the temperature is up, what's happening is microbes. What creates heat? No, this is friction. It's really small friction. But I get a lot of it, and it makes it make a difference. No, that's why the pile's heating up, because the microbes are reproducing. But what happens is, in this scenario, I only moisten on day 0 when I start. And by the time they get over here, they run out of water. So they dehydrate. So the microbes, instead of, if the temperature is going up and I turn it, it drops back down. But eventually it cools off. And when it cools off, that means they're no longer reproducing with each other, and then I can use that.
So you're covering it with a rain-proof material?
Yeah.
You're under a shed or something with 30% light, 70% shade. So just like an open air shed or a barn is fine, or by the barn door, or if you just do a pop-up tent, all those can work.
But the reason I bring this up as like a thing, but it's way beyond the scope of what I can teach you in this amount, just to be aware of the process of what we're headed for, of keeping these things low temperature, but this is leadership academy. If if I can get a pile this big of the best microbes, then I just put a tiny bit in, that 5%, I get 80% on my side. That's why K.N.F. is growing, because they figured this out through accident. But the third microbe I want to get to, because that first one was really accessible, they discussed it in the tooth one. The second one was a little bit more harder, but at least hopefully got the concept. The third one I want to give you is this one here. That's what I call a police. And when your neutral microbes are just chilling, they're just asking someone to help them. Who better to help them than the police? I was thinking about this presentation. But I call these guys the police because I didn't know what else to call them. They're called lactic acid bacteria. And if I say to someone, I'm going to spray some lactic acid bacteria, they look at you like you're crazy. But what I want to get at is we were talking on this the way over. It's about vocabulary. And if you were to speak Latin, you would be saying, I'm going to teach you today about milk sticks. Lacto is milk. Bacillus is a stick. Bacilli stick. So if that's why when I go and I make the vocabulary, instead of calling it lactic acid bacteria, it sounds crazy. They were just saying, the Latins were saying, you got some milk sticks? Yeah, I got milk sticks. Doesn't that sound cool and approachable? Versus like lactic acid bacteria. Right, so when I call it the police, just take it with like it's when you make these things like milk sticks, it's like, it's cool, man. When I call it lactic acid, it sounds like I could have. But these guys are super easy to make. In fact, you can, this recipe has changed more people's lives than anybody else, and more than the other microbes I was talking about. Lactic acid bacteria will clear the way for the other things. So what I did was I started with I got some starch water and some milk. It's essentially what I needed to do this. And so I'll go on to the next page here, where I actually show the recipe. So step one is to make starchy water. Who washes rice? You know when you're swirling it around, it comes all milky? That's what you want. Just instead of pouring it down the drain, just pour it into a shallow bowl and let that sit out. That's step one.
Is that it? Background, you guys can check it out when we're talking about it. Smell it. You even got it. If you want to take a shot of it.
Step two is to put it into milk. And when I do that after having this starch water sit out for 24 hours, it collects lactose from the air. Step two is I pour it into milk. And this one I did on Wednesday. And this was really old milk, and I didn't even expect it to come out. And it was, but what you can see is happening. Do you see the separation that's happening? Where I'm getting curds, cheese curds, and the whey underneath. So the whey down here that's separating out is the police. These are those microbes. They're in this serum, and they're really populous in here. So this one here is not a very good batch. I wouldn't. I'm still doing it. I'm not. But this one I wouldn't use for human use. Although for plants this should be fine. But what I should get is, if you look at my picture here, you see how this was firm. This came up. It was like poo-poo when I pushed on it. This, if I push on it, I think it's like baby turds.
That one's still young though, like you're still gonna transfer it to firm up, or it's already gone through its stage?
It's gonna form up more as I go. It was terrible to drive it across the iron while it was doing its thing. It was not happy with that. But I wanted to bring it to show to you guys. But this batch is not going to be like a picture perfect, this type of batch. But there's still a ton of lactobacillus in this.
And the serum, when it separates, like you was talking, that clear serum is what's getting passed around in the jar of a good collection.
And after I got the liquid out the bottom, then in this picture I'm just showing that I'm mixing it with equal parts of brown sugar.
That one's not mixed with brown sugar yet. I just took it out of the refrigerator this morning. But if you're not going to put it in the refrigerator, you have to do this step that he's talking about now.
Yep. And so to make it shelf stable at room temperature at equal sugar, and that again ties up all the water. So the lactobacillus, there's no water in the solution for them to eat. So if you can store these things at room temperature, right, by doing that. So in just 3 easy steps of taking your rice wash, which everyone knows, leave that out for a day or two, then mix it into some milk. A couple days it separates, and then you just extract the liquid off, and you've made the most powerful microorganism in the Milky Way. Why do you think they call it Milky Way?
Have you noticed the difference between using raw milk and processed milk?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, it's the microbes that you use on a breast milk.
Oh yeah, David's
Great.
You didn't even use the whey though, you just did straight breast milk.
One real quick too, I've used canned coconut milk. It's gotten a really decent catch. You don't get a lot of whey, but you do get some. And you can smell it and taste it. You can tell that it's deep with lactic acid bacteria too. So, and that was just canned coconut.
And what I want to bring it to is that this recipe here, the plates here, they're a big, wide family. Any cheese you like, cheeses, yogurts, sourdough breads, kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha, they all have lactic acid in them, lactic acid bacteria, but they're going to have different families. The whole point of this one specifically, in this recipe that I'm sharing with you, is to get a broad family. In your family, you know, if you have a broad family, there's someone that can, you can fix the problem. You can also fix the problem. You're gonna have running cars, right? Without that, so you're gonna have a broad family. You narrow your family down, and you're not as effective. So, but they do it for certain reasons, you know, to make certain yogurts. And that's why I wouldn't throw this out, even though this isn't as broad as I want it to be. Just whatever made it more narrow, only because I didn't wash the jar.
And then can you touch on the lactic acid as the driving force of H.I.N.F.H.E as well?
Yeah. So lactic acid bacteria, one of its really powerful components is a deodorizer. Because it's so small, it can actually smell on a molecular level and disassemble it. So when you have fish amino acid, which is taking fish and sugar raw, mixing it, what happens is usually if you do it right, the lactic acid bacteria takes over fast enough, and where usually you'd be getting the rotten fish smell, the LAB are actually breaking down the smell particles and everything in there and making it so it's not octane.
So the recipe that I came across just through practicing Kona was I'll take like a teaspoon of H.I.N.F.H.E and just put it into a bucket of water and leave it for like 24 hours. And you come back out to it, it smells reeking like lab like that. Just like that sweet, milky smell. Just from a little diluted H.I.N.F.H.E into a big thing of water.
So can this be used to spray on stinky chicken coops and stuff?
Absolutely. It's a miracle for animals. So I've been raising pigs since 2000, probably. And I, my pig times, like there's no smell. I wouldn't raise pigs without having this technology.
Part of the K&F teaching was no smell piggery and no smell chicken coops. And it works 100%. We were at a class at Jake's house one day. We're under his pig pen, and the pig, dumps, and it reeked. And even a few people smell it like awesome. Within 5 minutes, it was gone. Gone. Completely gone.
So that's the bacteria just that fast eating.
5 minutes later.
The way the pig pen works, I kind of figured it out, is there's logs underneath which help to hold nice good fungus. There's some wood chips on the top. When a pig makes waste, this entire thing is living with microbes, and the only water is in the pig's waste. So the microbes down below immediately go in where that moisture is, and they can dehydrate it fast. faster than anything else. So the only way this system fails is if it floods and this becomes wet, then the system fails. But if I keep this floor dry below, no matter how much the pig is pooping or peeing, this entire floor is able to heat it up under them. And the poop just turns back into food.
And the pigs then really eat the food right now.
Because the proteins change, the microbe, it's complete fermentation happening. It's a completely different chemical structure.
We're only active logs, so it's not totally those logs.
Well, yeah, I want these logs to last 20 years.
Thank you, live stream.
So I just
What
I
year is
got
it?
two more slides, and I just want to show, and then I want to show you just a little video. It's a drone overflight of my place to show you. But how do I do it? Because what the hell? I'm out here and talking about all this stuff. I'm telling you about all these things. For me, I've fully integrated Kona into my life. It is just like, I'm always thinking about my microbiome. And when I go to think about fertility, I'm thinking about them as through the microbial lens. And so today, we kind of live this life where we got like toxins around us, everywhere. Ubiquitous. That's what we do. And so subsequently, it just, it makes our microbes, not that great, and we drive cars. And you ever seen those memes where it's like, what people kind of do actually?
Yeah.
I kind of designed this slide as one of those. But, what I end up actually doing is living in a toxic world and arguing on the internet. But what I think I do is, I look at the soil and I try to analyze these things, right? And I try to look down, and I can, with a microscope, which I own, I can go and pull soil and I can look and I can determine exactly if your crop's going to do well or not, based on the biology I can see, based on the light of the, assuming you can also amend to that, you can go this way, but it's based on your biology is the way I can do soil nutrient analysis. I can also now, one of the things I like is, let's walk and I'll look at your weeds. I know exactly what's happening with your soil. I know where the bacteria and the fungus battle lines are. See that, and I can go to where those battle lines are, where there's the good guys versus the bad guys, and I can go add more good guys there, and they just flip flop. The good area keeps expanding. So the way I do that is I do a lot of foliars spraying. I don't, because I live on the people side, I don't have irrigation already laid out. If I did, I would inject into that. But since I don't, I do a lot of foliar stuff. Try to do the maintenance spray weekly. If I can hit all my plants with the maintenance spray weekly, it just, my papaya trees just take off, the canopy gets full, the fruit starts coming out. You just see that difference. When I stop spraying for a few weeks, I take a vacation, whatever, I just don't get around to it, you can watch that papaya tree, the canopy will start to shrink, and there'll be a little skip on those weeks I didn't spray, and I'll start spraying again, and you'll see more fruit come out. And so it's a direct correlation between me spraying weekly and what it comes down to is frequency. It's not that I spray a whole lot, it's that I spray enough, regularly enough. And when I do that, the whole microbiome, everything, those good guys stay in control. They don't have that stress. That 80% from my good team. And the maintenance formula, again, has food, structure, medicine, and boom, someone's saying. So by putting that out there, I'm giving the basis for what it means. Now, when I first start, I put out some microbes, some IMOs. I really, if I do a big soil disturbance, I gotta put those guys out. But really, mostly it's about feeding it. And then occasionally when things come up bad, I spray the police out there. Or I'm doing soil disturbance with the police out, and I use a decent amount of fuel right now. So I'm trying to bioremediate pastures. So that's fish amino acid and putting it on the combo and stuff. But ultimately, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to make my garden a living temple. where I just live in my fertility and have these natural cycles going around me, because I don't forever want to be doing this stuff. I don't want to be doing this. I want to actually have the sugarcane be putting out exudates to the flower, which is making me honey, that's making me the trees, which give me shade, and have this system start to get synergistically spinning. And my whole goal is how do I go from this over here to like this over here, and get those spinning, but still keep the computers. I love arguing with them. That's what it's for, right?
Think about that vision that Massimo Bucca laid out, paired with Greg's vision here, the communal reciprocity of growing locally and growing our communities and utilizing nature. And think about indigenous cultures and the original man. That was his environment. And think about the potential that we have in this time compared to now living on the opposite side of the spectrum.
So another innovation that I've had, but this comes back down to terrain. Terrain did this up before I mentioned it. But I've invented this thing that I call pile tech, and it came through laziness. I used to always mulch and spread that shit out, make it look nice, no weeds for like 10 minutes. But then I took 2 tractor buckets, dropped them, and went to the Philippines for a month. I came back and I was walking around my garden, and I just ended up standing, and I walked to the middle, and I was standing on this pile, and I was looking around, and I was like, damn, this is the most fertile spot in the entire garden, right where I'm standing, right where I didn't do what I was going to do, which was spread all this stuff out, which where I spread it all out, it was all gone because I was back a month and a half later. I'm looking in this one place, everything around it is thriving and pumping up. And it's what I did was I just left a pile. And so when we're trying to change the terrain, really what happens here is this pile becomes a fortress for those fungus under here. And the soil that develops under here is some of the richest, darkest chocolate brown goodness, because all the rain comes through, and just right here becomes the best, richest stuff. If I spread that out all thin, it's not going to make that same richness, right? It's just going to get eaten by the grass, and it's going to feed bacteria, and it's going to go away. So what I do is I create these fortresses of tile tech. Instead of trying to swallow water. That was crazy. Water. I'm not feel right in there. Look at that chance.
You're welcome.
All your microbes.
But this stuff here, so what I try to do is I try to distribute these piles around. So where usually I would have made rows and mulched some stuff and spread it out, instead I try to put these piles around, and now I'm planting in the circumference around these piles. And I'm thinking of it in microbial tech circles. Like, no microbe ever grows out in a straight line like that. Microbes always grow in cylindrical, circle fashion. And so if I want to work with the microbes and I want to work with them, why try to mulch and try to keep the microbes in here versus putting a concentrated, heavy food supply in the center and then letting that grow and build a fortress, and then letting the mycelia reach out from that pile and let the roots reach into that pile. And so I've gone to this lazy man method of pile tech by transforming my terrain, by just dropping these big piles, like, and out of a pickup bed, I'll make 3 of them, huge piles. But this changes the aspect of these are fungal fortresses. And if you start to think of building your terrain so you can build it so your microbes are going to grow here and reach out, this is what I've been getting into. And I'll go show you the video here, but I guess I'll finish this presentation because this is the last slide. So what I've been doing to try to get away from the computer and get more into this stuff, because this is like the Hawaii I want to live in, right? The one where it's the water is intact, where we got the clean water landing going into the Alva, into the Lotus, where we got our no-smell pigs up in Alpha that aren't creating waste problems, where we got nice fields, we got microbes growing around, the whales are coming back, and doing that, via the no-smell pig pen, the microbes, getting it all in there, and as I'm moving through the path of life, what I try to do is to build this foundation so that I can teach these solutions, these tools, so you can also join me on this path. And then together we can go and inoculate so that, you know, we're enriching the soil from the depth down. And that's why I just founded this thing, and it's called the Pureknf Foundation, because I think it's kind of a foundation we can all build upon. And, you know, the teaching of the Master Cho that came here in 2005, you know, Hawaii is leading the world right now in terms of regenerative agriculture and what we have going. We're also on the frontline battlefield of where the future ag paradigm is headed. So the more of you that know these solutions, the more we can do this. So that's where I'm trying to focus my energy, what I'm doing, live the example, but also more than just me. It's like that one slide said, it's a media war. And so trying to create this vision. You can see this and you understand what's underneath it, that is built on thriving microbes, and that 90% of you is that microbe, and you're going to acknowledge that secret society and work together in partnership, then we can achieve this, because we don't have to fight the evil. We just have to enrich that 5% of us, the good, and all of a sudden the neutral flip-flops, and this becomes possible way quicker than you ever thought. So that's my ultimate message here. It's like why do I wake up and read? Because I want to drink coffee. Why am I in Kona? I love you. Okay, so that's my presentation there, and then I just any quick questions here? And because I really to me what's important is showing you. So why talk? Is that kind of fun doing with us talk? Let's give a round of applause for Drake. Okay, and so just to bring all that back into like a tangible reality of what we're doing here, to show you just an overview flight of my place. On the tour goes towards Haile. So I'm just gonna pause it right here. This is my house here. This is a kitchen dwelling, and then these houses were supposed to be to help turn this into a farm, and we're getting there. Then over here is my greenhouses, and then there's my barn up here. This is my parents' house. So it's kind of, you can kind of see, perhaps you can see a few different paradigms.
Y'all put your hands out. Nah, put your hands down. Put them in the ground. Mix it with the ground. It's that new sound. Even if it's age old. Pressure that's a public eye. Even if we day old. Y'all put your hands out. Nah, put your hands down. Put them in the ground. Mix it with the ground. It's that new sound. Even if it's age old. Pressure that's a public eye. Even if we day old.
So if you check out the forest itself, what happens without us? All sorts of diversity happening, right? All sorts of good stuff happening. If you look at this pasture, this one's super overgrazed, right? What's happening? It's going towards a monoculture, right? One sort of thing happening. This is very poor land management happening. So this is the project I'm working on right now. This barn here on this side, there's 4 pig pens. And on this side, there's a chicken pen. And in the middle is my feed mixing and this kind of workshop classroom area. And basically, I'm taking this was that same super overgrazed area, and I'm remediating this whole area down here as well as this whole barn pasture area. guys notice the difference in the color of the bananas? So that's downhill from the big thing. That's just natural of what's happening. My pigs are in here, and this system is connected to the earth because it just is. There is a plastic liner if anyone has to. But look what's just naturally happening. You know, chickens over here, pigs over there, versus this other stuff.
Real revolution, independent movement. Restore, regenerate, get rid of this pollution, collusion, diffusion, all of this solution. There's no power.
So this, like what I started planting this field here. This is the oldest one, and then this is actually relatively new. This all came in the past year, I think. And then you can just see how it's microbes are changing that. And this when I say I can go look at your weeds and I can see where the fungus and the bacteria are coming from this overview here. Can you see where the fungus is? Can you see where my good microbes are? Can you see where there's and then can you see where there's stress? And so if you're tuned in and you start to look at the world this way, I don't have to go and soil sample over here. No, there's more fungus and more beneficial bacteria than if I soil sample up here. And what you also start to find is the soil texture changes. Out here, you can only put your finger in about a quarter inch. Back here, I can stick my whole hand into the soil. And so all these properties become apparent. Like you take those and correlate this to what I'm talking about, now you can start to see this bigger picture.
Can you bring some of that, like you said, and sprinkle it over there to bring that 5% up on the top?
I can and I do. And in fact, it's not that this area up here is not lacking microbes. It's not that this is lacking microbes. What this is lacking up here is a connection to other plants that are going to supply the foods well. And since they're not, the system up here isn't operating enough, they don't have that mycelia, that cycle, that inertia, that ball rolling here. I have to come up and I have to spray this. Versus these ones that are growing down here, they're tied into that whole fertility cycle happening. And my whole goal is to get my whole farm so that it becomes self-sufficient like this. Where there's enough intercrops, there's cassava, there's taro, there's all the things intercropping, plus the fungal is underneath, and I built out the topsoil. And that's what I want to get to, but these won't get there without me continuing to supplement the food. It's not that the microbes aren't here, because I've sprayed them, and I've inoculated right there. These guys are hungry.
Just enough fight, just enough love. Ain't no longer on no fighter, cause we all of the above. That's our way out of these cages that they put us in with no glove.
But I want to pause it right here because this is my front battle line. Okay? This is like when I talk about this thing. This is my garrison, my reserves, and this is the front battle line against this I'm trying to restore, which was largely bacterial oriented. And I'm trying to bring this fungal good microbes, forest fungal microbes out into here. And so my strategy, what I'm doing is, you can't really see in this picture too well, but out here, I'm dropping piles. So sticks. So instead of trying to mulch out a huge area, what I'm doing is I'm building these piles, and each where there's a pile, I'm sticking a banana tree. Because my banana tree is the first thing to be a reservoir. You ever shake a banana tree and how much water's in there? They're my reservoir. So I'm trying to get carbon and then a reservoir. And then after that, I'm surrounding it with cassava. And this is a more mature pile. Like this is my front line. This is an older one, and this is older. But it's the same technique where out in front, I'm putting piles. Then I'm planting bananas and sugarcane and cassava in these rows. Trying to think of this as battle lines. And right now, you see this pipe here? I just got a big tank that I can catch off of here. And now in this tank, I can put in my seawater plus all those nutrients and drain it out into this field. And within 90, I can drop 300 gallons of water out here in about 5 minutes. So I got this system set up, and so what I'm now doing is drenching from here out to my front lines and getting the nutrients out. So it's down here. So that's because I don't want to carry a bunch of water, but I want to get those nutrients. And I think of it like, like here's my reinforcements, and I got to get the nutrients, and the cannon's firing on this range right here to spread that out.
It's love deep, now we doing it, we proud of. We are not desirous.
But do you see my battle lines kind of come out there?
Fight that which holds you at the bottom. Stand for the land so that it makes you blossom. Akole mina mina ika pukala. Wala ba ma do ika poha. Ika pono hoko mohala.
So these guys down here makes a whole bay brown every time it rains. They lose thousands and thousands of acres of topsoil. It's just going out. This is my dad doing K&F, just a more mechanical way of the way he wants to do it with the mower versus he doesn't have the same polyculture setup. But here, coming back to my house again, this is where, again, I'm doing the pile tech, right? I'm just taking sticks, putting my piles out here. This is my front lines. Also a vehicle.
Yeah, I was gonna say you got one of those growing too.
Right, you know. But these, yeah, you gotta, it's a keep good. I don't want to keep looking. But these piles are out here, and I'm not out here trying to like fight this grass or do anything. I'm dropping these piles as my battle line to let them start decaying, to let them start getting the microbes. What am I doing out here? I bring trash cans, just like that 50-gallon disgustingly cheap recipe I gave you. Right here, drag a trash can, fill it up, and dump it over. Another trash can, dump it over, another trash can, dump it over. And with 3 or 4 trash cans out there, I've now made like 200 gallons plus of this stuff that I just drench. And I'm getting these piles to reinforce underneath them. But this system here is completely self-sufficient, and this is how this is where I'm gonna moving my farm to. This entire front that you saw down here, this is what I want it to look like. What I'm doing is a sugar for sugar cane juice, as well as a sugar nursery. As I see sugar to be one of the things that can raise Hawaii out of into prosperity again, especially when you're with the soil and generating and actually. Because sugar's like drugs, and you can sell it anywhere. But this is my technique. I got a lot of bananas against the forest bananas, then getting into my more grassland type of stuff and growing. And then I also periodically try to run tree belts through. So every so often I have Gliricidia or ice cream bean or some tree belts throughout this. But largely, when I get my system like this, even though my dad's like, this requires next to no maintenance. I can go cruise a couple months, come back, all the sugar's ready. It's easy. This system is self-supporting. The microbes in here, the exudates, the whole thing. This is like the way to get up. But to answer your question, Doc, when you were saying, do you have to mulch? Absolutely not. If you don't maintain the terrain, you just gotta spray the nutrients all the time. The more I mulch and the more I try to get systems self-sufficient like this, the less labor it is for me. So if I can get this to get nature to take care of that stuff, then I let it. And if it's cheaper, then I let it go. Mm-hmm. In terms of mulching.
This is kind of a fuel farm.
This is a above ground hugelculture, and this is what I'm running, and then but super diverse, versus like if you look around the rest of the property is kind of like mowed, like what you would want to see, and it's not like that's I mow in here to keep it down, but my whole goal is to minimize my amount of maintenance. I want to be here enjoying and eating your own food, but that's just self-sufficient, minimal labor, minimal maintenance. Yeah, so my friend's letting me borrow his drone for a little bit. But just stopping right here, just close up. I'm doing my garden beds. My borders all got lemongrass on them. I try to keep a wall with lemongrass. Then on the inside, this one's Suriname cherry because I'm building a nice hedge here. Some Gliricidia mixed in. Like I said, when I spring, like pies are loaded. When I miss, I get skips in between when I don't spring. But pretty diverse. The one thing that I get slapped from Master Cho is he says my stuff's too close. It's like it's not enough air and everything. But I side on too close because it's less.
Usually remedy because that's just biomass. You can go through it in the shade anytime you want and just add mulch up and go.
Yeah, and then I'm also using a ton of this basil. This is a really good hedge, but it also makes a really good ferment. And so a majority of the stuff I'm growing here too, like it's for chop and drop, but it's also to make ferments that then I can ferment with back on my plant. So everything in my garden has some use and aspect of what I'm doing. And that's, so what you saw there was me basically moving since like since I quit my job at the school, and I've been working on these gardens since at least 3 years.
Do you use truncated for your border plants?
I do. It doesn't do as well in my area. The lemongrass really hammers. The comfrey tends to get overgrown. PGP is awesome. The one thing for me is that PGP will, if I get a big wind, it'll break. And so then but that's fine. Mulch, drop. I love PGP.
You use vetiver?
I do use vetiver. Actually, right there is a really considerable. I don't have that much vetiver growing, but I would incorporate more of it.
So who's doing your sound test? Who's that?
Oh, so if you like the music, that's it's Tanaka.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
It's Lucky guys.
Yeah.
We'll stop So anyway, any other question? I saw it give you the animated way of seeing this, but then you can kind of see how I'm drawing it into practice. Largely trying to balance the terrain by placing the things out to support fungal life, but then also continuing to put the foods and put the microbes anytime I'm coming in. But it's really about supporting that team and just that little bit of spraying every week changes the biome and the whole thing takes part. And that's from the best of my experiences is what I can tell you and how I've been.
Has anyone tried incorporating that into a traditional, conventional stocking farm? And what their rate of success in terms of food?
Which aspect are you talking about?
Well, you're describing a methodology of farming, and so something that within this community does a lot of is coffee farming.
Yep.
Very different topography from where you are. Sorry, I don't know if it's on the present. So if you want to incorporate that same application into conventional integrated to eventually transition out, can that be as an alternative if you don't want to?
That's exactly what we
Absolutely.
do. At the school here, you can call us and that's what we do. We teach you how to change your farm from whatever method you're doing into a K&F method. We've got a few farms that could testify already. The cow farm at Makale and also Alex's farm. He's been converting his farm to K&F completely, and he has coffee and citrus orchards. So that's exactly what we're all about.
What was about coffee farmer up here in Mountain View? There's you got two things. One is your fertility, and that 100% guaranteed can take care of it in everything your coffee tree needs you to make things on site the second thing is your weed control. And like most coffee farms around here is just Roundup underneath and just scorch it underneath. That's something that I cannot how are you going to manage your grass and those things? Like Chris up in Kohala, where they decided to go, he grows backnuts, they decided to go full K&F. Backnuts are usually spray underneath, so it's easy to pick. But with this, they don't want to spray the poison because the poison then kills the microbe. So they then had to hire more people to mow. So did they lower their cost farming? Not necessarily, because now the same cost, it costs a lot more to mow underneath, and so weed management costs more. But now their ocean is getting cleaner, they created a couple more jobs, they're more profitable, the product is worth more. So and they're able to get larger quantity and less disease. So it's a lot of balance. It's not like a one-to-one that you have to just cut this out, because if you stop like poison under your trees, stop that. The amount of labor you're gonna do to get that same poison effect is big. And that's the one thing that cannot like try to make it more fertile. The good thing is that as you make the soil more fertile, your weeds go from what we consider like Roundup weeds, where it's just all like Spanish beetle, all that. And the more you do this, then your weeds become like good nourishing things, like a purslane or some sort of like some sort of grass. So that's the difference. Like if like it's not bare, but your weeds now are actually beneficial. They're actually giving the plants nutrients versus taking. So that's the bit of the paradigm to go to fit into say, okay, I wanna use this. You gotta understand the weed control and how the more of ground cover management, how that interacts. Because the fertility, no problem. Spray the trees, and bang, but now you got the
Full implementation is a change, is a shifting of the mindset as well. So if the owner of the property isn't on board, it's going to be kind of like a battle, you know what I mean?
You might think around it, you can achieve it with the living costs.
So expensive though.
What about the
Usually was actually happening.
Well, and it doesn't pay it forward. Whereas like I'm learning with I have to mow more often, and I hate mowing because I don't want to be using fossil fuels. But at least you're putting that back on. You're mulching then at that point just while I'm driving around. So now I feel good about that in that sense. But yeah.
What about previously the coffee border? Has there been a change in?
I don't go after them specifically. My neighbors do like crazy. So until they stop chasing them over my direction, I don't. I could be spraying a bunch of stuff and up my cost, but never win. So that's kind of where, like Logan said, the mentality has to be, you have to accept nature.
Once you have an ecosystem that supports life and not death, then that balance is going to come into balance just through the mystics, the vibration, through what you're setting out there as an ecosystem and doing as a predator. There's a balance to that. All these funguses that infect those beetles, there's all kinds of stuff that they rely on.
Well, another thing like I was saying about the opiate line, the more you can strengthen the microbes, the more just like also your opiate goes back. Is your opiate sick? Whereas maybe it's the other things, symbiotic. Fix the symbiotic things, then maybe your coffee, if you fix the soil, maybe the coffee was only weak because it didn't have this type of soil. And so the beetle came and it's like, oh, it's weak, so the beetle can enter. But if you put that stuff in the soil and that, the beetle comes in and says, oh, this tree is strong. I don't want to eat this tree. The
Flavor of the leaves are changed.
So on that level, you can like, it's not like, oh, I killed the pest, but I made my tree so strong that the pest cannot fight through.
Here's another testament at the cacao farm that we transferred to K&F. They're having problems with Japanese rose beetle. That was the big, or Chinese rose beetle. That was the big issue, and that's why they originally called me, even though we ended up transferring the whole farm. But later on, once they had implemented the K&F and we had fertility on the farm and it was going, the trees were boosting and we had plenty of growth, but some of the owner still complained about some of the rose beetle damage. But what we came to understand is that the amount of foliar that's on there, it was fine for the rose beetle to eat a few of the bottom leaves. That didn't damage the plant at all and it didn't affect production. So we actually mitigated the rose beetle just to smaller amounts. We didn't have to get rid of it completely. It's still there, but it's not damaging the crop anymore.
So just this last thing, I just reiterated it, but really when I say it's a medium work, it's about our mind, our thoughts. Like when we think well, what does a nice field look like? Oh, it's nice and cloud and all the hills, and that's what we think, because it's a media war. Like that's what we're told. Like, and actually, if you think through a biological lens, what's the healthy landscape? Oh, so with a nice mulch, you know, like you get a different thing. So what we're coming at is a different paradigm of even how we landscape our aesthetics. What should your garden, what should your orchard look like? And it's all these things coming together. But if you can start to understand the microbes and in every way with your aesthetics, think about them as well. Keep something that pleases your eye as well as pleases them. You'll fight less. So if you can get your brain around the media, the image of what is healthy, what is sexy, what is good quality, what I want to associate with. If you can get your mind there, the rest will follow. I would like to do one more thing. So when you come to my training, take it all. It's real intense. You gotta make all the stuff. You gotta do all the homework. But you get one of these fancy hats. And these are not easy to get. But Brethren Logan over here, he earned one. So. Perfect. Let's give a round of applause for Drake. I hope you guys all enjoyed that and got something from it. Get the book if you want to hang on to it. You give me $30, or if you don't, put it back in the box over there. And we're going to finish the class by making one of those cheap microbrews outside here. So if you want to stick around for that, you're welcome to. And then I also wanted to show you this if it comes up. This is the next class. It's going to be on Saturday next week, and it's the same thing. If you're already a member, then you're in there for the class for this month. If you want to come and just join this class, it's a $20 donation. But we're going to have Jon Billoon. I don't know if you know Jon Billoon, but he's been farming here in South Kona for over 40 years. He's seen the whole thing happen from fertility to poison, and he has so much information to give us about Roundup, about GMOs, like the real deal of GMOs, not like this funny cartoon we have in our head about scientists spicing beans and stuff. He's going to tell us really what GMOs are. It's some heavy Frankenstein stuff. You guys would be amazed. But he's going to also talk about growing food. I'm going to do a presentation again to kick off the day of how to eat to live. So I'm going to go through food-like products that they sell us in grocery stores and explain them and explain what they do to human beings, all the way up to what fresh fruits and vegetables can do for the human biome that we learned about today as well. So give thanks again. Come next Saturday if you can and join us out here for a microbial brew. Thanks.